I always thought I knew these woods. I'd walked every ridge, mapped every creek, and memorized every twist in the trail. As a park ranger at Red Creek National Forest, I prided myself on my intimate familiarity with the land. Yet that night, when the moon disappeared behind a suffocating cloak of clouds and the wind died to a low, treacherous silence, I discovered how little I actually understood the forest I called home. I've been on patrol since dawn, checking campsites for expired permits, logging fallen trees, and ensuring the trails remained clear of hazards. My boots had guided me along the winding dirt paths hours earlier, but as the sun dipped behind the western peaks, a creeping unease settled into my bones. I shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue. Still, by the time I reached the ranger station after nightfall, I felt the oppressive weight of something watching me from the darkness beyond the dim ring of the porch light. Sitting at my desk, I thumbed through the logbook, half-heartedly jotting down mileage and visitor contacts. My radio crackled with the usual nighttime chatter, a hiker reporting a lost headlamp, two campers complaining about raccoons rifling through their food. Nothing out of the ordinary, until midnight struck and everything changed. A shrill scream ripped through the air, slicing into my drowsy haze. It didn't come through the radio. It pierced the night itself. I bolted to my feet, heart hammering, and grabbed my flashlight. My legs carried me across the gravel lot toward the sound, but before I could find its source, the forest swallowed the cry and then silence. I stepped onto the trail, the beam of light dancing across gnarled tree trunks. I called out, voice trembling, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer, only the rustle of leaves as the wind shifted, carrying an echo that seemed more like a breath than a breeze. Somewhere off the trail, something moved. I followed the sound, pushing past thickets until I reached a clearing. The flashlight caught a glimpse of a decayed campsite, charred logs, and discarded gear strewn around. The uneasy knot in my gut tightened as I noticed the fresh drag marks in the dirt. Someone had been pulled from beneath the blackened remains of a campfire. I crouched, running my glove over the disturbed earth. There were footprints, two sets, which stopped abruptly at the edge of the clearing, as if their owners had vanished into thin air. A chill lengthened the hairs on my neck. I stood and spun around, but the forest beyond was an impenetrable wall of shadow. I pressed the button on my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Cole. Request emergency backup. Possible missing person near Clearview Ridge, close to mile marker 14. My voice echoed into the void. There was no response. The forest seemed to swallow my words. I took a cautious step forward and froze. Directly in my path lay a single, bloodied ranger cap mine. My name was embroidered in navy thread above the brim. My pulse went ice cold as I scooped it up, examining the frayed edges. It was definitely mine, yet I couldn't recall losing it. On better reflection, I'd never taken it off all day. Behind me, a guttural breath rasped through the darkness. I snapped around but saw nothing. My breath hitched. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute blackness. The silence, once oppressive, felt almost eager, as though the forest itself held its breath and prepared to strike. I woke on a bed of moss, soft as feathers but damp with dew. My neck throbbed. My cap lay discarded beside me, smeared with more blood than I cared to count. I sat up, blinking against a warm golden light that filtered through the canopy. Where was I? I didn't remember falling asleep, let alone crawling into a bed of moss. Above me, the trees arced into an endless lattice, as if funneling me toward a point unseen. A gentle breeze whispered through the leaves, carrying a scent that stung my nostrils, smoke, decay, something rotting just beyond sight. My head yanked back, and a sudden pounding in my skull almost made me retch. I placed a hand against my temple, feeling a sticky smear of congealed blood. I staggered to my feet, scanning my surroundings. This wasn't the clearing where I'd lost consciousness or something had moved me. The sunlight around me was unnatural. Instead of the cool silver rays I'd expected at dawn, the forest glowed a sickly amber. Shadows shifted in the corners of my vision, conjuring memories I couldn't place. Children laughing, a lullaby in a language I didn't know, the scrape of metal on metal. As I took a step forward, an urgent buzzing filled my ears, the sound of insects skittering beneath the fallen leaves. My boots crunched against twigs and pine needles. The forest floor was littered with strange symbols, etched quickly into rocks and trees, curved lines intersecting in impossible configurations. They seemed to shift as I stared. There was a rhythmic cadence to them, as if they were meant to guide me. Something urged me to follow. Desperate for answers, I obeyed. I began to descend a narrow, winding path I didn't recall from any of my patrols. The trees grew thicker, their trunks swollen like bloated beasts. Their branches pressed close overhead, weaving a canopy that blotted out the sky. The deeper I ventured, the more the forest seemed alive and watching. Halfway down the steep incline, I spotted a structure, a cabin, half swallowed by creeping vines and moss. Smoke curled lazily from a crooked chimney. The door was ajar, revealing a dimly lit interior. Part of me screamed to turn back and find help. Another part, some primal instinct, urged me forward. I glanced at my status as a ranger, my duty to the land and the people in it. I swallowed my fear and took a step inside. The cabin's interior was as malformed as its exterior. The floor sagged beneath rotted boards, and shadows pooled in every corner. A single oil lamp sat on a rickety wooden table, its flame swaying. Near it lay scattered pages of a journal, tattered and stained. I knelt and picked one up, squinting at the scrawl. May 2nd. I have been here 3 days, yet the forest refuses to let me leave. Things move beyond the trees at night, whispering my name. They say I'm chosen. I do not know what it means. I feel their eyes on my back as I write. My fingers trembled. The handwriting was jagged, the lines uneven. Below, I could make out columns of another language, ones that looked part native, part something else entirely. The last page I had clutched against my chest, stained red. Too late to run. The forest demands another. So I write my confession by candle's last light. If you read this, be warned. Those who wander here alone do not return unchanged. A low creak sounded behind me. I spun, heart thunderous, to find the doorway empty. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My boot heel caught on something, an object half buried under age-darkened boards. I pried it free, revealing a tarnished ranger badge, its insignia warped and twisted as if melted. I recognized the emblem Red Creek National Forest, but this version seemed older, like an echo from some other time. My chest constricted. Why did it feel like I'd seen that badge before? The cabin's back wall opened into another room, where a rope dangled from a ceiling beam. The rusted noose lay coiled around itself, swaying gently as if someone had just left. I swallowed bile. A rusted tin plate lay on the floor, and as my flashlight's beam swept over it, I saw words scratched into the metal, "Leave." I fled the cabin and stumbled back onto the path, heart racing. The amber forest light within the trees had vanished. Now the world was painted in normal morning hues. My pulse refused to slow. I blamed it on panic and exhaustion. Yet each time I thought of the cabin's objects, the journal page, the warp badge, the noose, I felt a cruel lull tugging at my mind, as if memories I could not fully grasp were stirring just beneath the surface. I pressed onward, determined to find the ranger station and radio for help. As I descended, I noticed the forest tightened around me, the pines closing in like colossal sentinels. The path became slick with moss and wet leaves. Every rustle seemed amplified, every distant bird call warped into a scream. I tried to focus on familiar landmarks, a fallen sycamore that marked the halfway point to the river, the rock outcropping shaped like a bear's head. But those were gone. Instead, there were only identical trees, branching into infinity. I realized with a jolt that I had no idea which direction I'd come from. North could have been east, and I'd have believed it. Panic curled in my gut. I yanked out my map, now soaked, and studied it in the dim underbrush. Nothing matched. No trail markers. No signage. Only shadows and the oppressive hush of something hungry lurking nearby. I spun in a circle. The forest looked alive, flickers of movement perched on branches, darting between trunks, as if hundreds of small creatures watched me from the darkness. A sudden snap of a twig to my right froze me in place. I held my breath. The snap repeated, closer. Something was following me. I shouldered my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam caught a figure, tall, thin, hunched slightly, draped in a tattered ranger coat unsettlingly similar to mine. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I sensed its gaze locked on me. I backed away, tripping over a root and sprawling onto my back. My flashlight rolled out of reach, its beam disappearing. The figure approached, and I scrambled to my feet and ran. My boots slapped against the undergrowth. Sweat stung my eyes. Branches tore at my shirt. My lungs burned. The figure's footfalls were eerily quiet, but I could hear them, almost guiding me deeper into the forest. At last, I burst into a small clearing with a pond, so still it reflected the sky like obsidian glass. My chest heaved as I slowed, slowing to a catechizing whisper of breath. Intense silence pressed down. There was no sign of the figure. Only the faintest ripple across the water's surface, like something skimmed just beneath. I leaned over the shoreline, heart pounding. My reflection stared back, contorted by fear. For a moment, I thought I saw behind me the figure's vague silhouette, tall and stooped, wearing a badge pinned crookedly on its chest. I whirled, but nothing remained. The forest, a silent audience, held its secrets close. I knelt to scoop water into my hand and found smears of blood, fresh and sticky. My breath hitched. A desperate whisper slipped from my lips. "What do you want from me?" The trees remained unmoved. Panic roared as I scanned the tree lean for any sign of an exit. My only thought run. I rose unsteadily, then heard a distant, echoing whistle, a child's tune, faint, warped, half-remembered. The whistle became a chant. Ranger. 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 It rose in volume, echoing through the canopy like a death knell. My body involuntarily turned in its direction. There, across the pond, stood the same hunched figure, closer now, face obscured by a hood of tattered cloth. It cocked its head, as if listening to me. My throat constricted, words lodged there and refused to come out. Instead, I raised my flashlight, and the beam illuminated crisscrossing scars on its arms, like claws had been carved into its flesh. It took a step forward and pointed. I followed its gaze to the far side of the pond, a narrow path vanishing into darkness. Instinct overtook fear. I ran for the path, adrenaline spiking. The pond's murky edge sucked at the soles of my boots. I nearly collapsed at the path's mouth. Turning, I saw the figure had vanished. I didn't look back. Hairs on my neck prickled as I burst from the clearing and plunged back into the choking forest. I stumbled blindly, trusting only the urgent beat of my heart and the faint sliver of daylight that filtered through the canopy. The ground angled sharply downward, like cliffs hidden beneath moss and leaf litter. My ribs ached each time I caught myself on the uneven earth. Branches slapped my face. My palms stung from clutching at rough bark. Minutes or hours later, the forest floor leveled out. I realized I was standing at the edge of a deep ravine. A jagged stone staircase, centuries old and almost swallowed by vines, beckoned me down. It wound into darkness, twisting like a snake's spine. I swapped my flashlight to my left hand, steadied my breath, and began the descent. The further I descended, the cooler the air became. The sensation of being watched intensified. I groped at the damp stone walls, hearts racing, as the steps spiraled deeper beneath the earth. Sweat pooled on my brow. I could hear water dripping somewhere, like a heartbeat ticking away in the stillness. Finally, the staircase ended, spilling me into a cavernous chamber illuminated by lanterns held in rusted iron brackets. The cavern's roof arched high above, lost in shadows. Pools of green fungus clustered in corners. The floor was littered with remnants, decayed wooden crates, broken park signage, the skeletal remains of animals scuttled through by rats. In the center angled a stone pedestal, and atop it rested a battered ranger hat, identical to mine except older, worn to threadbare by time. I approached it cautiously. As I neared, odd whispers swirled around my head, chanting in tongues I couldn't decipher, yet somehow understood. They promised safety if I returned the hat. They promised peace if I swallowed the badge that lay next to it, tarnished by rust but still intact. My heart hammered. Something primal urged me to reach out, to lift the hat, to swallow the badge's metal shine. But instinct screamed that to touch either would be to bind myself to this place forever. The whispers turned to laughter, a chorus of children's voices echoing from the cavern walls. Ranger, Ranger, Ranger. Their laughter morphed into screams, shrill and piercing. I backed away, tripping over debris that sent my flashlight clattering across the stone floor. The beam flickered erratically, then died. Pitch blackness enveloped me. Panic clawed my throat. I fumbled for my radio, but it was gone, lost in the descent. I tried to run back the way I'd come, but the staircase had vanished. In its place was a sheer stone wall, rising into the darkness above. I was trapped. The lantern light flared suddenly, revealing dozens of the warped ranger badges hanging from iron spikes embedded in the walls. Each shone under the flickering flame, emblazoned with names, some legible, some worn away. J. Matthews, 1932. L. Hernandez, 1978. M. Cole, 2024. I stared in horror. My name glowed like a beacon among them. M. Cole, 2024. My legs gave way as if gravity had doubled. The laughter continued, still children, still the same chant. Ranger, Ranger. A phantom breeze roused the lantern flames, casting monstrous shadows that danced across the walls. In one flicker, I saw figures, thin, hunched, wearing ranger coats, circling me, their faces blurred. I felt cold hands clasping my shoulders. I collapsed to my knees as a voice, ancient and tremulous, whispered into my ear, "You cannot leave. The forest has claimed its ranger." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the frantic pulse against my ribs. I screamed, raw, wasted cry that echoed through the chamber. The figures advanced, their mouths opening in silent shrieks. A sudden explosion of light seared my eyes. Dirt and stones rained down as the cavern shook. The chanting screeched to a halt. The battered hat and rusty badge toppled from the pedestal. A violent tremor threw me backward. Dust choked the air. Flames snaked along the walls. Lanterns exploded in wet crack pops, sending shards of iron and glass clattering. I clutched the hat and badge to my chest and crawled toward a faint glow at the edge of the room. Where the wall once was, a crumbling fissure yawned. White light spilled through. Something pulled me toward it. With one last burst of strength, I staggered forward and crawled through the opening. I emerged into a clearing bathed in moonlight, the same cabin from before, though now its door hung shattered, and the windows gaped like empty eyes. My heart thundered against my ribs. I spat out dust and ash. The air tasted metallic, and I was certain I smelled smoke. I shivered in the cool night air, blade of fear slicing through me. In the foyer, the remnants of that battered lamp lay broken. The journal pages lay scattered across the floor, burned at the edges. I recognized the circuitous scrawl. Each page told the same tale, a desperate, futile attempt to escape the forest, a confession of surrender, a plea for someone to stop others from entering. The last page, though mostly charred, bore a single sentence written in bold, jagged letters. There is no escape. I backed away, tripped, and fell onto the threshold of the cabin. When I tried to stand, my legs refused. The forest's grip was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I saw them then, pale figures drifting in the trees outside, hunched shapes with hollow eye sockets, wearing the same tattered ranger uniforms. Their bodies twisted unnaturally, like branches grown in grotesque shapes. The first figure extended a hand, bony fingers tipped with soil. I scrambled back into the cabin and slammed the door. The wood splintered, but held. Outside, the chanting began again, deeper now, more insistent. From somewhere deep in the woods, a great crack echoed, as if an immense tree had been torn from the earth. The ground beneath me quaked. My knees buckled and I collapsed, mind whirling. The cabin floorboards groaned. I looked toward the loft where I'd first found the journal. Something rained down from above, dark, pulpy chunks of wooden fabric. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a rope ladder dropping through a widening hole in the ceiling. It hung loose, swaying softly. I felt drawn to it, compelled by equal parts desperation and dread. I hesitated, then climbed. Each rung felt slick with something wet, blood or sap, I couldn't tell. My fingers stung. I reached the top to find a hidden attic space lit by a dim lantern. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. In the center of the attic lay an altar built from logs and stones. On it, a cluster of items, a cracked shaker of ashes, a single dead raven with its chest slit open, its feathers matted, and beneath it, a tattered ranger's jacket I recognized as mine, slashed and smeared in crimson. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might tear from my chest. The chants from below mutated into something darker, as if the forest was speaking through some ancient, blasphemous tongue. I backed toward the hole in the ceiling where I'd come from. But as I reached for the edge, a voice whispered in my ear, as if someone stood right beside me, "You belong with us." I turned abruptly. The lantern's flame guttered, revealing a figure draped in shadows. Its face was a hollowed skull wearing a ranger's cap, the same emaciated visage I'd seen stalking the woods earlier. Its jaw unhinged in a silent scream. The halo of rotten breath caressed my cheek. My stomach lurched. My legs turned to liquid as I stumbled backward. The lantern slid, and the flame sputtered out. Darkness swallowed me, thick and suffocating. I fell backward toward the hole. I braced for impact, but instead felt nothingness. The hole below seemed bottomless. My mind blanked. Then a force yanked me. I was falling, spinning, tumbling through blackness so vast I couldn't tell up from down. I came to on the forest floor, drenched in sweat, my clothes torn and muddy. The cold moonlight filtered through the pines. I gasped, tearing away leaves from my face. My flashlight had reappeared clipped to my belt, its beam flickering tenuously. My hat and badge were gone, though the taste of metal still lingered in my mouth. I sat up slowly, forcing my limbs to cooperate. Where I should have seen the cabin, there was only endless trees, branches interlaced into a dense lattice. The journal pages I'd found were gone. In their place, writhing roots pressed against the earth, as if the forest's veins had drugged me back outside. I felt the hush of the woods, oddly peaceful, almost welcoming. Only when a twig snapped behind me did I realize I wasn't alone. I spun. There, a pale child, barefoot, clad in tattered clothes hundreds of years old, stood watching. Her eyes were black voids. A thin smile curved her lips. She tilted her head and spoke, "Welcome home, Ranger." Her voice echoed oddly, like wind rustling through dead leaves. I backed away. My legs trembled. No, no, I'm not. I choked on my own words. Hatred and terror warred within me. She raised a hand, and the forest around me shifted. Roots plunged back into the earth. Shadows recoiled. My breathing hitched. I tried to turn and run, but the sleeves of her faded dress wrapped around my ankles like rope. I toppled forward, pounding the leaves. She knelt, placing a hand on my back. Warmth flooded me, like sunburned skin pressed to coals. I felt my memories spool out, unspooling like a reel of film. Childhood summers camping with my father, lost hikers rescued, the thrill of guiding visitors through the redwood groves, the promise I'd made to protect the forest. But slowly the memories warped. Nights where I'd wandered alone, hearing laughter beneath my feet. Times I'd felt the stir of unseen eyes upon me. Events I dismissed as dreams. Nights spent wandering through a forest that breathed and pulsed like a living thing. The lines blurred. Her cold hand tightened. I screamed. And in that moment, I understood I had never truly been the ranger of Red Creek Forest. From the day I donned this badge, I'd been chosen. The forest had been teaching me its secrets, shaping me for this purpose. Every rescue I'd made, every trail I'd cleared, it had been an offering. A promise I would join their ranks when the forest demanded. No, I rasped, struggling. My voice echoed absurdly. She tilted her head, as if amused by my defiance. Then she knelt fully, pressing her lips to my ear. "It's time, Ranger. Time to protect us." I shook my head frantically. The roots beneath me began to writhe, inching up my arms like tentacles. My wrists tightened against my body. Panicked, I jerked my hands free, but more roots emerged, bursting from the ground. They braided around my legs, my torso, constricting my chest. The child's face swayed into focus, her lips parted in a grin, revealing teeth too sharp for a child. "You belong with us," she whispered. Her voice coiled around my mind, distorting my thoughts until I couldn't tell where she ended and I began. Pain exploded in my chest as the roots formed a crown of rotting that encased my head, sealing out the night sky. The world snapped into silence. No insects, no wind, no birdsong. Only the murmur of 1,000 voices, a choir of dead rangers chanting, "Guardian, Guardian." Guardian. As the wood creaked shut, I realized this was my fate, to oversee the forest's eternal hunger, a sentinel born of living flesh but consumed by the earth. My scream was swallowed in the forest's throat as the crown sealed my fate. I went still, mind numbed, as the whispers became my pulse. I was the ranger they demanded, and the forest was finally at peace. I woke, though I did not remember falling asleep. The sun had risen, casting pale gold through the canopy. I stood, shaking off the remnants of the night's torment. My ranger cap perched upon my head. My badge gleamed proudly on my chest. The world felt ordinary, too ordinary. I surveyed my surroundings with practiced ease. The trail ahead curved gently through the pines, leading toward park headquarters a quarter-mile away. I could feel the weight of the badge, the familiar scratch of canvas on my scalp. My duty called. Today, I'd finish logging the miles patrolled. I'd check on the hikers returning from the summit. I'd ensure no fallen logs blocked the trail. But as I took my first step forward, I thought I heard a faint whisper, so soft I couldn't place the direction. A child's laughter, half remembered, rose on the breeze. I paused, heart fluttering. The air around me tasted oddly metallic, like a promise broken and mended in the darkness. I shook my head, forcing the sensation away. I was a ranger. Of course I'd heard nothing. Everything here belonged to me. I held my head high and strode down the trail. After all, the forest needed a guardian, and I was the one who answered its call. I should have known the forest wouldn't let me leave so easily. I'd spent 5 years as a park ranger at Dawnridge State Park, guiding visitors through its towering pines and ancient oaks, rescuing lost hikers, and logging trail maintenance. Every day, I felt a tug at my soul whenever I stepped among the trees, as though the forest whispered secrets I couldn't fully discern. I ignored those whispers, rationalized them as nothing more than the wind or my entire imagination after long shifts. But on the morning of April 14, 2024, as I rounded the bend in Willow Creek Trail, I realized how foolish I'd been. I'd come upon the body just as the sunlight peeked over the eastern ridges, its pale rays glinting off the surface of the creek. The man lay face down in the water, his uniform soaked through. His blood had stained the shallows crimson. His eyes were wide open, glassy and unseeing, gazing into some unknowable void. A ranger like me, but I'd never seen him before. The nameplate on his damp jacket read, R. Sinclair, 2018. My breath caught in my throat. That couldn't be right. I only started in 2019. I knelt by the bank, heart hammering. His hand reached out as though pleading, gnarled fingers wrapped around a scrap of tattered cloth. I pried it free and saw, under the tangled mud, a single page scribbled with frantic handwriting. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was my own, the confessions, sketched the night I patrolled the old Pinevale Road and swore I'd heard something, laughter or screams, echoing beneath the canopy. My note read, "They took him. The forest took him at midnight on a night without stars. He tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. Now I only have hours left to save myself. If you find this, do not enter the lake by the Witch's Pine." Park records showed Witch's Pine no longer existed, cut down after the 1923 fire that consumed the old logging camp. Yet here was evidence of its presence, a page of my own words, sealed in waterlogged paper, found folded into a corpse whose name I'd never known, a corpse that couldn't possibly still be alive. My head spun with questions. Why did I write that page? When? How had it come from my own pen? As I stared at the body, the chill skittered up my spine. The sudden snap of a branch somewhere upstream jerked me from my thoughts. I looked into the gloom of the woods, empty and silent, yet pregnant with menace. The last line on the page burned in my mind. Do not enter the lake by the witch's pine. I stood, shoving the page into a waterproof envelope and tucking it into my jacket. With trembling hands, I radioed headquarters. Dispatch, this is Ranger Holt. I found a deceased ranger, male. Estimated time of death 12 hours. Name Sinclair. Requesting backup and coroner. My voice sounded hollow. I knew in that moment that my time in Dawnridge State Park had tethered me to something far older and darker than any routine patrol. And if I was going to survive, I need to face the whispers in the trees and the shadow of Witch's Pine that haunted the lake at the heart of the park. I arrived at the ranger station just after sunrise. 2 patrol cars blocked the narrow road, one for the sheriff's department and one for the coroner. I stepped onto the wooden porch, sunlight brightening my uniform, but my hands shook so badly I had to lean against the railing. Sergeant Marlowe waited for me at the edge of the steps, arms folded, face taut with worry. "Holy hell, Holt," he whispered when he saw me. "You look like you saw a ghost." Something like that, I managed, forcing my voice steady. He was in the creek, upstream from Willow Creek Trail. Dead for at least half a day. I wiped my palms on my trousers. Name Sinclair, badge number Ranger, 2018. Marlowe's face paled. R. Sinclair. That guy's been missing since last October. They searched near Pinevale Road for weeks. Thought maybe he just got lost out there. He paused, lowering his voice. They never found a body. I nodded slowly. He's here now. I saw him. I thought I recognized the nameplate on his jacket. I swallowed. Apparently, I wrote a note about him, too. Note. Marlowe echoed. Yeah. Found it in his hand. My handwriting. It says he was taken by the forest at midnight, something about Witch's Pine and a lake. It's crazy. I felt tears prick beneath my lids, unbidden. But Marlowe, I swear, that note is in my handwriting. I wrote it. I wrote it months ago. I can't remember. He reached out and wrapped my shoulder firmly. You did what you had to do, Ranger. Just tell me everything. He led me inside, where Dr. Lestrange, the coroner, waited. The stench of death, wet, clotted antiseptic, filled the room. The body lay on a steel table under harsh fluorescent lights. His jacket, once crisp and official, was soaked through with creek water. His eyes stared. He was younger than me, maybe 35, clean-shaven, dark hair matted with mud. Rigor mortis had set in. His limbs were stiff. Dr. Lestrange nodded grimly as I spoke. Time of death roughly midnight last night. He's been in water for at least 12 hours. No obvious external wounds. No signs of a struggle. Unexplained drowning, but the body wasn't found in the lake. I swallowed. Why did he end up in the creek? There's no trail leading from Witch's Pine Lake to here without cutting across dense underbrush. The doctor shook his head, and the lake froze over until early March, just thought a week ago. Diving into it in April is dangerous. Could be hypothermia, but he needed to be in the lake itself, not in the creek. He frowned at me intently, as though considering whether I was somehow implicated. Ranger Holt, was there any unusual activity in that sector of the park? Have you heard anything? Rumors? Reports of foul play? Maybe animal attack? I hesitated. The voices in my head, the whispers that had started months ago. Strange footprints circling campsites. Campfires found cold in the morning when campers swore they'd stoke them before bed. I'd chalked it up to raccoons or hikers stealing firewood. Nothing that jumped out, I said, choosing my words carefully. People go missing once in a while. Hikers run off trails, bad weather. But Sinclair, I didn't know him. He transferred here last season, but I never worked a shift with him. Dr. Lestrange nodded and moved to snap on his gloves, pulling a drawer open to produce a small evidence kit. Take that note you found. We'll analyze the fibers, see if there's anything unique about it. But, Ranger, if you say it's your handwriting, we'll need to check your shifts. Did you write this at the station? When was the last time you saw your own handwriting in your notes? The question hit me like a blow. I couldn't recall writing that particular phrase. My heart stuttered. I think I wrote it when I was patrolling Pinevale Road last fall. But I don't remember. It messed up. I turn away, feeling nausea rise. I should get back to patrol, see if I can find anything at that lake. Marlowe rose. All right, but Holt, be careful. And bring a partner. Tonight, someone with you after dark. I nodded, but even as I left the ranger station, I felt the forest shift in response, its canopy seeming to droop, silent trees twisting in impossible angles, as though recoiling from the presence of death. I forced myself to breathe, tucking the envelope containing the note into my jacket. If I wasn't careful, the forest would claim me too. By mid-afternoon, I was at the trailhead for Pinevale Road. The road itself, abandoned decades ago, was now just a rough track that wound through a thick tangle of evergreens, rendering it barely visible from above. I parked my truck next to an old sign half buried by shrubs. Pinevale Logging District, closed to traffic. I checked my watch, 3:42 p.m. The sun was already edging westward, promising darkness by 7:15. I grabbed my backpack, flashlight, spare batteries, water, GPS, two-way radio, and my service revolver. Marlowe had insisted I bring something more than just standard-issue pepper spray. I didn't like the idea of shooting anything inside the forest, but if it came to it, I'd do what I had to. I took a deep breath, forcing calm into my voice. Dispatch, Ranger Holt en route to Witch's Pine Lake. ETA roughly 1 hour. No sightings of hiker traffic on this road. Over. The radio crackled with static, then answered with Sergeant Marlowe's voice. Copy that. Keep an eye on the time and don't push into darkness without backup. Over. I flicked off the radio and started up Pinevale Road. Brambles snagged my boots, and the track wove between trees so close together that the sunlight fractured into kaleidoscopic patterns on the forest floor. The silence here was different, oppressive, almost sentient. I felt as though the air itself watched me closely. Birds were silent. The wind didn't rustle the leaves. Only my breathing and the crackle of twigs underfoot filled the void. An hour later, I rounded a bend and saw the lake through the trees, the still circle of dark water fringed by black pines. Witch's Pine Lake, as old-timers called it, so named for a lone white pine on the northern shore, twisted like a witch's finger pointing toward the water. The tree stood tall and gaunt, its bark bleached by sun and wind, its trunk blistered by scars too symmetrical to be natural. In the late afternoon light, it looked ghostly, as though carved from bleached bone. I paused by the shore and took in the sight. The surface of the lake was so still it reflected the sky perfectly, as though a mirror laid upon the earth. I took a small boat, an old rowboat chained to a rotting dock, and unlatched it. The wood creaked beneath my weight as I climbed inside, tossing my backpack in before settling onto the bench seat. I grabbed the oars and pushed away from the dock, only to feel the boat roll slightly to one side. Unease twisted in my chest. I looked back at the dock. The chains rattled as though something stirred below the water, then stilled. I shook the thought away and rowed toward the witch's pine. The oars cut effortlessly through the cold water. Ripples radiated outward, distorting the reflection of the sky into shimmering rivulets of silver. The farther I went, the darker the water looked, as though it drank in the light. My reflection wavered beneath me, a pale figure in a park ranger uniform. My heart pounded as I approached the tree. When I reached the witch's pine, I leaned the oars on the edge of the boat and climbed onto the bow, pulling myself onto the small, jagged island that held the tree's gnarled roots. The pine's branches reached skyward in grotesque angles. Its limbs were bare except for few tufts of needles that clung like ragged garments. It stood alone, crowned by a sky that had shifted from pale blue to bruised purple. Darkness pressed into the edges of vision. I crossed onto the soggy ground and stood before the tree, feeling the bark's rough ridges beneath my fingertips. An inscription carved into the trunk caught my eye. "Leave me be or join the lost." Underneath were initials, multiple sets, some so weathered I could barely make them out. Others were more recent, RS 2018, JP 2022, MH 2023. My hand went numb on contact. My own initials, freshly carved, as though I'd etched them myself. I felt bile rise in my throat. I groped for my flashlight and shone it at the carvings. The deeper grooves spelled something else, too faint to read, but arranged in a circle around the trunk. They looked like runic symbols, a language I did not recognize, yet felt as familiarly as my own name. Panic roared as I pulled back my hand. The carvings pulsed in the beam, as though alive. A sudden splash behind me snapped my head around. The water, once still, bubbled like a cooking cauldron. Wisps of fog sighed across the surface. From the depths of the lake arose a figure, thin and emaciated, garbed in a water-soaked ranger's uniform that clung to bones jutting beneath the flesh. Its skin was paper white, marred by cracks like old porcelain. Long hair drifted around its sunken face. It rose until its head broke the surface, looking at me with eyes black as the abyss. I lurched backward, heart slamming against my ribs. The figure's mouth opened in a hollow scream, but no sound came, only bubbles bursting as it sank back beneath the water, leaving ripples that surged toward the boat. I stumbled backward, nearly toppling off the tiny island. My flashlight clanged to the ground and skidded to a stop, its beam bouncing off the pine's trunk. I scrambled for it, fumbling in the mud. The forest seemed to bend in on itself, the trees leaning closer, their branches like skeletal fingers. My flashlight flickered, then steadied, illuminating the tree just as the water's edge at my feet roiled and spit. Bone-white toes emerged from the depths, followed by shin and thigh, until the corpse ranger stood waist-deep before me, jaw slack, eyes unblinking. Its head tilted, examining me as though I were prey. I choked out a sound, no breath, no gasp, just a hollow exhalation. The corpse ranger raised an arm. Ribs protruded beneath stretched skin, fingers curved into talons. It beckoned me with a finger, then slid back into the murky water. The ripples receded, leaving the lake black and calm once more. I clawed at the muddy bank and scrambled into my rowboat, shoving off so abruptly I nearly capsized. The oars slipped through my numb fingers. I rammed them into the water, rowing with every ounce of strength until I reached the dock. I vaulted from the boat and ran across the slick boards, my boots slipping. I heard a splash behind me, something heavy entering the water, then silence. Adrenaline propelled me up the hill toward my truck. Branches scraped against my jacket, tearing fabric. My chest burned. When I emerged back on Pinevale Road, I paused under a lone street lamp installed by the Forestry Commission. My heart rattled in my chest as I fumbled for my radio. Dispatch, dispatch, this is Ranger Holt. Code Red encountered something at Witch's Pine Lake. I saw there was a body in the water. I need immediate backup. Over. Static crackled. The response came slower than usual, strained. Copy that, Ranger. Units are en route. Hold position at the road. Do not. If you see anything, do not engage. Over. I dropped to one knee and tried to calm my breathing. The note in my jacket felt heavier than before. The forest all around was quiet, too quiet. No chirp of birds, no rustle of squirrels. I climbed into my truck, locking the doors, headlights on. Every muscle in my body quivered. The sense of being watched stayed with me, as though thousands of unseen eyes followed my every move. I waited in a cab while sirens wailed faintly in the distance. My reflection in the windshield looked gaunt, haunted. My eyes were ringed with dark circles I couldn't recall earning. I thought of the note, "Do not enter the lake by the Witch's Pine." I hadn't heeded its warning and nearly paid the price. I slid my hand into my jacket pocket, feeling the envelope rub against my thigh. If only that page had been the only warning. Sheriff's Deputy Karen Miles arrived 10 minutes later, parking behind my truck. She was a sturdy woman in her late 40s, familiar to all the rangers here. Her emerald green eyes narrowed when she saw my pale face. "Holt, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said as she stepped out of her cruiser, hand hovering near her holster. "I saw something," I rasped, unbuckling my seatbelt. "In the lake. It wasn't alive, but it looked like Sinclair." My voice cracked. He rose from the water, beckoned me, then sank back again. Deputy Miles frowned. "Sir, you need to calm down. You said yourself he's been missing since October. There's no record of a body. Are you sure it wasn't a deer or something?" She peered at my muddy boots. "You were on foot?" I shook my head. "No, I was in a rowboat." I returned to the dock. I ran here. My fingers curled around the steering wheel. "Look, I've got it on the radio. Request code red around 4:45 p.m. My ETA to the lake was 4:55. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. She nodded and placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "All right, let's keep the scene secure. I'll call the ME's office to bring a camera and gear. If there's something out there, we'll find it. But Holt, you look shaken. Are you sure you're okay?" I forced a wry smile. "Yeah, just saw something I can't explain." I know what I saw. I felt tears prick behind my eyes as I closed the truck door. "I need to go back." She studied me for a long moment, then relented. "Okay, we'll go together," she said, hefting her flashlight and radio. "If you see that whatever it was again, you call it in." "Understood. Understood," I whispered. I retrieved my backpack and we set off down Pinevale Road. The sun hung low, casting the forest in a murky golden light that felt more like twilight than afternoon. Long shadows stretched across the trail, transforming tree trunks into looming specters. When we reached the dock, the rowboat still bobbed gently at the end of the rotted boards. I glanced toward the island where Witch's Pine stood. Its branches reached like spindly claws. Ripples still fanned outward from where the corpse ranger had last submerged. Deputy Miles clicked on her flashlight and shone it across the water. "Nothing but dead leaves and shadows," she muttered. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. "I think We need to do a thorough search of the lake tonight. Line it up with flood lamps, boats, everything. And we need to dredge the bottom. If he sank again, we need to find his body. Riverside's going to file a missing persons report if he shows up at the morgue with someone like that still in the creek. Miles lifted her chin. Agreed. I'll call in a dive team from the sheriff's department. Meanwhile, let's mark the perimeter. She clipped a yellow crime scene tape between two trees, and we began to flank the lake's edge. I kept my gaze fixed on the witch's pine, haunting me like a beacon. As dusk fell, a gray veil cloaked the forest. Mist curled across the water, drifting toward the shore. Every time I heard a twig snap, I jerked around. Leaves whispered overhead, though there wasn't a breeze. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it, but the forest swallowed all sound except my uneven breathing. At 6:30 p.m., flashlights bobbed in the gloom as other deputies and rangers arrived. Backhoe trucks rumbled into position near the dock, preparing to launch a small motorboat rigged with spotlights and a mounted floodlight. 15 rangers formed a half circle on the opposite shore, flashlights probing the black water, while divers prepared gear on the dock. I stood near Deputy Miles, my revolver holstered at my side, though I doubted a gun would help against whatever lurked in these waters. My stomach turned when I heard one of the divers say, "He said he saw Sinclair's face, but this is a body recovery, not a ghost hunt." A chuckle rippled among the divers, but tension underlay their laughter. As darkness deepened, the floodlights flickered on. Bright beams cut arcs across the lake, revealing shattered reflections in the water. The waves licked at the shore, and a thin veil of fog closed in around us. The glare cast twisted shadows among the trees, shadows that darted for just a fraction of a second before dissolving. I gripped the note in my pocket. Readed lines of my own handwriting stared back at me. The forest took him at midnight on a night without stars. I felt tears slip down my cheeks as I stared at the words. I couldn't shake the dread gnawing at my spine, that the forest was alive, waiting for me to slip. At 8 p.m., the divers finally slipped into the water. One by one, they disappeared beneath the surface, torches mounted on their helmets illuminating the murky depths. Their bubbles rose in a steady stream, like 100 fish drawn to the light. A hush fell over the assembly, an eerie calm. I stood at the dock's edge, trembling. I wanted to call out to Sergeant Marlowe, but my voice wouldn't come. The notes of my heartbeat drowned out everything else. Suddenly, a diver's helmet bobbed motionless above the water, then sank again. The bubbles stopped. Silence sank over the lake like a wet blanket. A split second later, a muffled scream floated through the water, echoing against the near-shore rocks. The other divers froze, hovering as if rooted in place. Then, one by one, they began to surface, unhurried, like specters. Each emerged alone, rolling to their backs before thrashing with panicked limbs, gasping for breath. Deputy Miles rushed forward. "Retrieve the divers. Pull them out now," she shouted. Hands plunged into the water, hauling the wrecked divers onto the dock. They clawed at the air, their faces twisted in terror, eyes wild. I ran along the dock with them. One diver broke free and dove beneath the surface again, sinking without a trace. His flashlight beam wavered for one heartbeat, then vanished. A whirlpool formed where he had disappeared, water spiraling at impossible speeds. We watched, frozen, as the vortex widened, swallowing the glow of the floodlights. Then, in the swirling center, I saw a pale face, Sinclair's face. Eyes black as void, mouth contorted in anguish. He stared at me, mouth opening in a silent scream. Seconds later, the whirlpool collapsed inward, its fury dissipating until the surface was once more a dead calm. I screamed, stumbling back. Deputy Miles grabbed my arm. "Holt, pull yourself together," she yelled. "Get back now." We dashed away, leaping from the dock as it tore itself away, plummeting into the lake in splinters. I looked back to see the water roiling, as though the lake itself was enraged. Lights flared overhead as backup moved in. They formed a perimeter at the shore, rifles drawn. There was no time to process what had just happened. One moment, men in diver suits. The next, a whirlpool that tore the dock apart and nearly dragged me in. My mind reeled. All I could glimpse was that pale, silent face at the center of the vortex. Sinclair's face, pleading, accusing, lost. As I shook from shock, my radio crackled. "Sheriff's Department to Ranger Holt," Marlowe's voice said. "Retreat to the staging area. Air support is en route. Use extreme caution." I stumbled over to him, my jacket soaked with lake water and sweat. "Marlowe, he was there," I stammered. He looked at me. I saw him. My legs gave way as I knelt on the edge of the muddy bank, trembling. Marlowe knelt beside me and placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Sinclair's gone," he said quietly. "But Holt, save yourself. We'll contain this. You've done enough." He rose and yelled orders to the other deputies. I watched, numb, as they secured the perimeter, raised more floodlights, and called for a dive vessel with sonar. None of it mattered. I knew this wasn't simply a drowning case. It was something ancient. Something in the water that was more than just a corpse. Deputy Miles crouched next to me, her voice gentle. "We're pulling everyone out. The dive team's not going back. We'll map the bottom from the surface. No one goes near that water again." She took my hand. "Come on, Holt. Let's go." I nodded numbly, clutching the note in my fist. The forest was both silent and alive around me, as though it were breathing. The witch's pine loomed on the far shore, its fractures and carvings glinting under the floodlights. I felt utter dread tighten my chest. Marlowe approached and offered his hand. I let him help me up. "We'll revisit this tomorrow," he said. "For now, let's get you someplace safe." As I walked away from the lake, I felt countless eyes tracking my progress. Eyes beneath the water, eyes among the trees. The forest exhaled, and I felt the weight of something settled on my shoulders. I had crossed a threshold tonight, and there was no going back. The night passed fitfully. I barely slept in my cot at the ranger station. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sinclair's face, his dead, accusing gaze. I awoke in a cold sweat at 2:13 a.m., convinced I heard someone whispering my name from the darkness outside. I bolted upright and flicked on the lamp, finding only the shadowed walls. My heart pounded until I was sure my chest might burst. At 6 a.m., I forced myself to a chair in the common room. The room smelled of stale coffee and burned donuts. Cots lined the walls, some empty, some showing signs of other rangers sleeping off their night shift. Deputy Miles sat at a table hunched over a map, coffee in hand. Sergeant Marlowe stood at the bulletin board, staring at photographs from earlier, shots of the swirling whirlpool, the body in the creek, and the carvings on the witch's pine. I approached slowly, weary. "Marlowe," I rasped. "What now?" He turned, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. "We need to prove there's something unnatural in the lake. The dive team's sonar crew is on the way. Meanwhile, we'll interview Sinclair's family, trace his last hours before he disappeared, see if any clues point to this." I nodded, though my stomach roiled. "What about the note?" I tapped my pocket where the waterproof envelope lay. My own words, warning not to enter the lake. They found me at midnight. My shift log shows I was in the station then, writing shift reports. How could I have written that? Marlowe sighed. I looked at your logs. You were at the desk until 11:40. Then you left to patrol Pinevale Road until 1:15. You couldn't have been at the lake. Something somehow made you write that note. I paled. So you believe it? My voice cracked. The forest, the witch's pine. It's calling us, shaping us? Do you believe that? He shook his head. I don't know. All I know is that we have two bodies, Sinclair in the creek and the missing diver. We found traces of both on the lake bottom. Sinclair's gear tangled in algae, the diver's belt buckle lodged between rocks. We were supposed to pull them out, but the lake wouldn't let us. It spat them back. We pulled a chunk of rotten wood, part of the old Pinevale Bridge, from the bottom, wedged across the deepest spot. It shows there's a depression there, like a sinkhole 5 feet deeper than the rest of the lake. He waved at the map. We marked the spot with buoys. Tomorrow, we'll bring a crane to pull the debris, then have the divers go back in with live cameras. I nodded numbly. That pit, 5 feet deeper, where the whirlpool had formed. Whatever lay in that depression held a hunger. And I knew in my gut that losing Sinclair wasn't just an accident. It was the forest's blood price for trespassing again. I forced myself to lean back. What about the carving of my initials? I'm aged 2023. His face tightened. We found that at the base of the pine. Fresh. Someone did it recently. You said you didn't carve it. That means someone did it for you. The question is who and why. I shook my head as though to clear it. I don't remember. But I was out there in the dark 3 months ago, patrolling Pinevale Road. There were footprints, circles of prints around that clearing. I thought they were animals. My voice faltered. But maybe I was wandering. Sleepwalking. Writing that note in my sleep. Returning here at night to carve that pine. I don't know. Marlowe frowned. If you're not conscious of it, if your mind is bleeding into this place, then you're in danger. Stay away from the forest tonight. You're off shift. Go home, get some rest. Home. I shook my head, voice hollow. My home is a 10-minute drive through these trees. I can't bring this into my house. It'll follow me. I rose, feeling dizziness. I'm staying here. Deputy Miles stood. You should at least file out for the day, Holt. Get your partner assigned to Pinevale Road Patrol. And go home. It's not safe for you to stay. She paused. Trust me, sleep in a motel. Don't stay in the forest tonight. Her words dug into me. I felt tears prick my eyes. I can't. My voice came out rough. I need to be ready tomorrow. I need to see this through. They exchanged a glance. Fine, Miles said quietly. But Holt, check in every hour on the radio. If anything, if you feel anything, I want you off the trail, regardless of what the sheriff and I say. I forced myself to nod. All right. They left me in the empty common room. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting everything in cold, unwelcoming brightness. I sank onto the chair, pulling the note from my pocket. The words blurred as tears fell onto the envelope, smearing the ink. But underneath, I could still read the desperate script. They took him. The forest took him at midnight on a night without stars. He tried to warn me, but I wouldn't listen. Now I only have hours left to save myself. If you find this, "Do not enter the lake by the witch's pine." I felt a terrible weight settle on my chest. The forest had taken Sinclair. The lake had taken a diver. And I was next, unless I stopped whatever was unfolding. I swallowed hard and tucked the note away. A sudden crash from a hallway snapped me upright. My heart slammed. I stood, hand drifting to my holster, listening. Footsteps, light, shuffling, echoed down the corridor. They paused outside the common room. My pulse dammed against my temples. I flicked off the overhead lights, plunging the room into darkness. My breath caught as the doorknob rattled. A hush followed, punctuated only by distant drips of water somewhere in the station. I dared not move. Then a whispered voice, low and hollow. "Ranger Holt." It was my own voice, twisted, ethereal, as though encased in ice. The door creaked open and closed. I raced to the door and yanked it open. No one was there. The hallway lay empty beneath the flickering lights, the walls stained with damp. I raced toward the front desk. Every window along the corridor revealed nothing but the dense forest and wash of headlights from Deputy Miles's cruiser. I bolted outside and searched the grounds, heart in my throat. The night was still, full of shifting shadows. Not a soul in sight. As I crossed the parking lot to the staff parking area, I saw my patrol truck idling, lights on. That was impossible. I'd parked it turned off. A wave of nausea churned in my gut. I crept toward the driver's side, hands shaking. The passenger seat held my flashlight, still lit. The glove box lay open. My patrol cap rested on the floor. Inside the driver's seat was the abandoned note, smeared with mud and blood. When I reached for it, I saw that the flap had been torn and the edges were singed. Somewhere in the dark forest, something laughed. I spun around. A pair of headlights appeared, moving slowly down Pinevale Road toward me. It was Massive's black SUV, Marlowe's rig. He pulled to a stop facing me, flashlight scanning my face. "Hold! Get in!" he shouted. Relief and dread mingled as I leapt inside. The radio crackled. "Holt, dispatch. Are you there?" I keyed the mic, voice trembling. "I'm here. Something is here." Marlowe gunned the engine, spitting gravel as we tore onto the road. The forest closed in on our headlights, branches reaching out like fingers. The note burned in my pocket. "Tomorrow," I whispered to myself. "Tomorrow we finish this." By dawn, the lake was a freight of machinery and men. A fire truck's floodlights bathed the shoreline in harsh white. 2 dive boats circled the center, sonar mapping devices booping softly as they scanned the black depths. A crane hovered over the water, massive cables snaking down to haul the rusted Pinevale Bridge remains from the abyss. Dozens of rangers and deputies stood in circles, drinking coffee, whispering theories in low tones. I arrived at 6:15 a.m., accompanied by Sergeant Marlowe and Deputy Miles. My eyes were bloodshot. My uniform lay creased from tossing and turning at the station. I felt hollow, as though some vital piece of me remained trapped beneath the witch's pine lake. Marlowe led me to a small cluster of rangers near the dock. "Holt, chief diver, says they found remnants of that pine bridge lodged 5 feet beneath. We're prepping to hoist it out." I nodded numbly. "Good. Maybe then we'll see." My voice trailed off. I swallowed. "Anything on the sonar?" Miles pointed toward the dive boat Raven's Eye, where a technician squinted at a monitor. "They see a dark shape about 10 feet across, half buried in silt. They can't be sure if it's wood or metal. They'll guide the crane hook by GPS." She clasped my shoulder. "You sure you can stand here?" I closed my eyes. The wind sighed through the pines, as though anticipating what was to come. "I have to." At 7 a.m., the crane cables snagged the old bridge's twisted beams, hoisting them inch by inch from the water. The metal groaned under stress, and rust cascaded as the structure breached the surface. I shuddered at the sight. 15 tons of decaying wood and rusted steel, the remnants of a logging road that had collapsed in 1965. Memories flickered in my mind. Photos of loggers marching station logs down that very bridge, unaware of the swamp below. I shook my head to clear them. As the crane lifted, the water churned violently near the base of the witch's pine. A sudden whirlpool formed, as it had the day before. Ripples radiated outward, pushing the crane's cable across the dock. The structure swayed. There was a screech of metal, then the cable snapped, tipping the bridge section backward. Its weight broke apart the logs as it fell back into the lake with a thunderous crash. Gasps and curses reverberated around me. Crowds rushed back as waves lapped at their boots. I watched, frozen, as a dark shape rose from the silt. It was triangular, tapered at one end, its surface slick with algae and moss. The sun glinted off rivets in a metal plate. It was the coffin. I recognized that flat top and rusted handle, the burial box from Willow Creek Cemetery, buried near the graves of 3 missing loggers from 1907. My throat went dry. The coffin's lid cracked open of its own accord, spilling a faint, sour steam. The coffin's interior lay bare, empty save for 2 objects: Sinclair's ragged detective's hat and a faded ranger's badge with the name R. Sinclair, dated 2018. But the face-up bones that should have filled the box were gone. A sudden sound, a scraping, a wet tearing, came from beneath the coffin. I stumbled backward, tripping on a piece of wood and landing on my back. My flashlight clattered away. I could see the coffin was tilting, sinking back into the mud as though something beneath fought to breach the surface. The main weld on Raven's Eye's support beam fractured with a piercing crack, and the boat tipped at a violent angle, sending divers tumbling into the frigid water. Panicked screams and alarms blared as water gushed onto the dock. I scrambled upright, blood singing in my ears. Through the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a dark figure slithering through the shallows, an emaciated form dragging itself along the beach, moving faster than any human should. Ranger Collins, nearest to the diving platform, attempted to draw his pistol, but the figure blurred across the sand with unnatural speed. Collins' arms lashed out. The figure swiped at him, yanking him toward the water before vanishing beneath the churning waves. Collins's scream trailed under the spatial echo. He did not re-emerge. The water swallowed his body as though it had never existed. A dozen rifles raised in unison, firing into the roiling lake. Bullets ricocheted off stones and water droplets, splashing high into the air. The return fire sent the creature, Sinclair's corpse, rising onto the shore in a spray of muddy water. Its skeleton was gone, just a rotted husk of torn flesh and bones beneath, now heaped on the sand. When the rifle fire ceased, it slumped, obviously dead, the trickle of black water pulsing from its mouth. My knees weakened, and I collapsed into the sand, watching through blurred vision. The witch's pine trembled, its branches cracked, sending splinters of wood cascading into the lake. It groaned, a living, dying sound. Then it split down the middle, revealing a hollow gulf within. From its shattered trunk sprouted a pale mist that crept outward, then dissipated into the morning air. I closed my eyes and let tears slip down my cheeks. A hush fell over the scene as the lake stilled, the fire truck's floodlights dimming when the power cut. A new kind of silence claimed Dawnridge State Park that day, a silence named relief, but also sorrow for the lives lost. Sinclair, the diver, Collins, and countless others who had vanished over a century. A voice whispered in my ears, soft, distant, "Thank you, Ranger Holt." I jerked upright, but all I saw was Deputy Miles hovering above me, her face pale and strained. "Holt, don't move. We need a medic over here." Someone else helped me to my feet, and I was guided away as the remaining rangers and deputies closed ranks, investigating the shore. I cradled Sinclair's hat and badge, proof that he'd existed, proof he was gone. I traced the stitching with trembling fingers. How could something so alive be nothing but dust now? My knees gave way, and I sank onto the grass, the sun rising higher, warm but distant. The witch's pine stood broken at the lake's edge, splintered and charred as though it had been struck by lightning. I thought of the note in my pocket, soaked, crumpled, the ink smudged beyond legibility. Yet those words, written by my own hand, had saved me. They had warned me off the lake. I rubbed my throbbing temples. My mind spun. My legs refused to work as though sewn to the earth. Sergeant Marlowe approached, kneeling beside me. "Holt, you all right?" he asked gently. I nodded, though tears fell unbidden. "You saved us," he said. "You listened to yourself, and you got out. It's because of you that we contain this, at least for now." I closed my eyes. "Is it over?" I rasped. Marlowe's face was tight with exhaustion. "I think so. We'll lock down the lake, dredge the coffin completely tomorrow. Hunters will find pieces of the witch's pine for souvenirs, maybe. But Holt, it's not over until the forest forgets." He paused. "You need to take leave. Go home, somewhere away from trees. Get some rest, Ranger. You did well." I nodded numbly. I rose unsteadily to my feet and brushed my uniform, spotting flecks of mud and charred pine on my shirt. "I'm leaving." My voice trembled. "Take me to my truck." Marlowe put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll arrange it." Before I turned away, I looked back at the shattered witch's pine. Its bare branches arched like an empty rib cage. I felt the forest watching me one last time, silent, hungry, yet strangely at peace. I mouthed a silent goodbye to the place I once called home. My heart ached with relief and sorrow. The forest had kept its promise. It had taken Sinclair. It had tried to take me, but I'd survived. As I walked toward my truck, Underwood, the park's caretaker, an old man with a weathered face, stood leaning on a shovel near the shoreline, warily watching the drying puddles where Collins had vanished. He tipped his hat to me. "Thank you, Holt," he said quietly, "for listening." I nodded again, voice catching. "Thank you, Underwood, for watching over the rest of us." He gave a slight, sad smile. "I'll keep watch until they bring the holy water and blessings. This place needs healing." I paused by my truck, hands trembling as I unlocked the door. In the grass near my boots, I saw an object half buried in mud, my flashlight. I picked it up, wiping the silt from its lens. As I did, I spotted another piece of paper lodged in the crevice, a blank postcard, damp and discolored, the edges frayed. On the back, in faint pencil scrawl, were 2 words, "Don't forget." My breath caught. I felt and smelled the faint tang of pine sap on the wind, though no pines remained standing. I stuffed the postcard into my jacket pocket. I took a final shaky breath of the forest air, ancient, bittersweet. Then I closed the door to my truck and drove away, the lake and its broken witch's pine receding into my rearview mirror. I didn't look back. Weeks passed. Dawnridge State Park remained open, though the lake was cordoned off, silent beneath heavy tarps. Divers dredged the lagoon, finding nothing but mud, submerged logs, and shattered fragments of a coffin. No bones, no bodies, no lingering echoes of the dead. The sheriff's department declared the missing persons case as closed, attributing losses to unstable ground, freak accidents, and unfortunate drownings. But I knew the truth, that beneath the still water, something unspeakable had once risen. I took a month's leave and spent my days in my childhood home in Oakwood, a small town 200 miles south. I walked tree-lined streets and slept in a house that creaked with memories, but I never turned my back to the woods. At night, I dreamed of the witch's pine, images of my own eyes, black as bottomless pools, staring back. I saw Sinclair's face, contorted in silent agony. I woke in cold sweat, certain I heard someone whisper, "Don't forget." I tried to distract myself. I volunteered at the local animal shelter, walked my dog along suburban sidewalks, and took long baths to wash the forest scents from my skin. Still, I felt tethered to Dawnridge. I couldn't escape its pull. Every pine tree, silhouette on the horizon, felt like a stolen voice calling me home. One morning, 2 weeks into my leave, I received a letter. It bore no return address, just my name, written in spidery script. Inside was a single photograph, the witch's pine stump, charred and black, lying on the edge of the lake. Beneath it, echoed in the still water, was a faint reflection, another pine rising, roots sinking deep, branches clutching sky. On the back, scribbled in the same frantic handwriting as the ripped postcard, were 2 words, "Remember me." My hands shook. I stared at the photograph until sunlight slid over the curtains and shadows lengthened on the wall. They said the forest had forgotten, had finally let go. But I could feel that it was watching, waiting in the hollow of that stump, ready to rise again. I folded the photograph and tucked it into my pocket, heartbeat thundering. The world continued. Cars hummed on highways. Children laughed in playgrounds. Leaves rustled in the morning breeze. Yet in my mind, the witch's pine lived on, silent, patient, hungry. Because some places never truly die. And once the forest has called your name, it never stops. I'd spent 3 summers as a park ranger at Blackwood Canyon, guiding visitors through its corkscrew switchbacks and guarding the forest floor against wildfire. By day, I walked the ridge trails, stopped sleeping campers from starting illegal fires, and answered questions about every hiker's favorite wildlife: foxes, owls, elk. By night, I slept in the ranger cabin perched on a bluff overlooking a winding river that roared through the gorge below. It was peaceful, too peaceful, I thought, but I never could have anticipated the nightmares waiting for me beyond those riverbanks. It began on July 12, 2024, when the drought was at its height and the deer had grown so desperate they wandered into campsites. I was finishing my evening patrol along the West Rim Trail, checking for campfires that had overstayed their welcome. The sun was setting behind jagged cliffs, casting long shadows across the canyon floor. Everything felt normal until I reached the Dolly Clark Overlook, where the rattling air carried something unnatural, a faint echoing cry that curdled my blood. I froze at the rail, peering into the dimming gorge. At first I thought it was an owl or a mountain lion yowling in the distance. But the cry was different, far too human-shaped, too wrenching. It rose and fell like a pleading lament. My radio crackled with static. "Ranger Whitman to dispatch," I said, voice trembling. "I'm at the lookout, heard something odd in the canyon." "Over." Only static answered. I frowned. By design, our radios had coverage all the way to the river's bottom. If I heard something, everyone should too. I stepped back from the rail, ignoring the hairs pricking on the back of my neck. As darkness pressed downward, I scanned the trees lining the trail. No campers, no headlights, only the hush of wind through pine needles and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I returned to my truck at the trailhead and filled out the radio call for the night shift. Nothing to report. Then, before climbing inside, I glanced at the overlook one last time. The canyon's depths were pitch black now, but I could have sworn someone or something stood on a narrow ledge halfway down, just beyond the river's bend. I blinked, and it was gone. I shook my head and got into my truck, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. After all, I've been hiking ridge trails alone for weeks. A bit of stress, I told myself. That night, I slept in my bunk bed, the creaking mattress the only sound until well after midnight. I dreamed of faces pressed against windows, mouths gaping in silent screams. I woke with sweat beading at my hairline and reached for my radio. It was silent, as though drained of power. I frowned and saw the clock read 2:17 a.m. The radio should have crackled with night traffic. I sat up, craning my neck toward the door. The window pane trembled with a faint vibration, like a hushed pulse. A sudden metallic thump came from the floor below, a sound too low to be a raccoon, too heavy for a branch falling. It came again, thump, thump. My heart thundered as I slid from the bed. The cabin's single light was too dim to illuminate the corners. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the doorway, blood pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Each thump echoed through my chest, drawing me downstairs. At the bottom step, the thumping stopped. Eerie stillness followed, as though something were holding its breath. I cast my flashlight across the kitchen, overturned chairs, a spilled mug of coffee on the counter, its contents congealed in a cracked pool on the linoleum. I shivered. This cabin was supposed to be locked every night. No one should have entered. The front door lay slightly ajar, swaying gently on its hinges. I stepped forward, every nerve alight, and reached for the door to close it, only to discover muddy footprints leading from outside onto the threshold. My flashlight's beam caught something at the edge of the porch, a small carved wooden figurine, its face twisted into an impossible grin. It was hand-sized, about the height of a child's palm. The wood was dark, almost charred. Intricate runes were carved around its base, runes I didn't recognize but felt an inexplicable dread at seeing. I swallowed, dropping my flashlight to examine it more closely. The grinning face seemed to shift, like a reflection in rippling water. I staggered back and something hard, something unseen, struck my shin. Pain flared as I fell to my knees, the figurine toppling over onto the porch boards. The runes on its base pulsed faintly, glowing in the darkness. Instinct told me to run. Back to my truck, to the main ranger station, anywhere away from this cursed place. My fingers grazed the figurine, and heat scorched through me. I shook my hand, dislodging the object from my grasp, and scrambled into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind me. I bolted it, hands trembling, and yanked open a desk drawer for my keys. Then I felt it, a pressure from behind, as if something were pressing against the cabin walls, trying to push its way inside. My breath caught. I backed away, chest heaving as the walls groaned. I turned the lock on the bolt. The doorknob rattled violently, like a hand yanking it. The windows rattled in their frames. Then silence. I sank to the floor, tears stinging my eyes. My uniform lay wrinkled on the table. Tomorrow, a fresh set of clothes, and I'd face this with a clear head. I'd find out who inserted themselves into my cabin. And the figurine, some sick prank, someone hoping to scare me. I could handle that. I was Ranger Whitman. I protected these woods for years. No one made me tremble like that. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I woke to birdsong and sunlight streaming through the windows. I assumed my pounding heart was simply relief, but I noticed a single footprint, barefoot and covered in soft mud, imprinted on the floor beside my bed. I stared at it, mind blank. It was small, child-sized, and beside it, in a spidery scrawl on a scrap of paper taped to my bunk's footboard, were 3 words, "Welcome back home." My shift began at first light, but by dawn I was already awake, unable to shake the experience of the previous night. I slogged through coffee in the ranger station's break room, every sip bitter. The exception was the footprint. Mud fresh from the riverbanks. I couldn't imagine how someone had crept into the cabin without waking me. The ranger station logbook confirmed no authorized personnel arrived or left after 8 p.m. the previous night. My name was the only one scribbled on that day's entry. Whoever, whatever, had visited me was long gone by the time I woke. I shoved the coffee mug aside and forced myself to focus. I spent the morning patrolling the shale bench along the East Fork Trail, looking for unwanted campfires, ranger stickers stolen, anything that might explain the break-in. The air was thick with pine resin and drought-fried dust. The morning temperature hovered around 78 degrees Fahrenheit before lunch, an unusual coolness for mid-July. The canyon's rim, usually drenched in sunlight by 9 a.m., remained veiled in clouds that spilled through the gorge like mist. I tried to log the weather anomaly on my handheld unit, but the touchscreen froze for a moment, displaying static lines that flickered across the screen. When it resumed, the temperature reading showed 60 degrees Fahrenheit, far below the digital thermometer's external sensor. I frowned but moved onward. At 11 a.m., I stumbled across something that froze me cold, a shallow grave just off the trail, marked by a mound of disturbed earth and a length of red ribbon tied to a dead branch above it. Soft soil had been scraped away, recently given the loose pine needles atop the mound. I knelt and brushed aside pine litter, uncovering bone-white fragments that crumbled at my touch, too brittle to have worn away naturally. Fragments of clothing, now stained and torn, were buried underneath. A flash of recognition hit me. The fabric was from a child's fleece jacket, size small, with a cartoon bear pattern I'd seen sold at the general store in Hartsfield, a town on the canyon's south rim. My radio crackled. "Whitman, come in," said Deputy Flores, her voice clipped. Sheriff's Department found a missing hiker's belongings in the Jenny Creek campground this morning. Looks like a Blue Ridge Wildlife shirt, disgusting weeds from the marsh in his pack. I swallowed hard. "I'm on my way there," I replied. Then I glanced at the shallow grave, mind racing. I snapped a photo of the site as evidence and murmured for dispatch. "Suspected remains, juvenile size, East Fork Trail, grid reference 7D. Request coroner." The static that followed felt like a faraway thunder. I backed away from the shallow grave and barked my shin on a hidden rock, limping as I radioed dispatch for backup. The deputy chief had insisted I keep the Jeremy Creek campground secure until the sheriff's deputies arrived. I needed to report my findings, but the thought of exploring further felt like poking a sleeping bear. Flores arrived 45 minutes later, flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies. We hiked down the sandy path to the campsite where the missing hiker's possessions lay strewn about: a tattered backpack, a discarded water bottle, and a balled-up shirt snagged on a tree root. The missing hiker, a college student named Tyler James, had been reported missing 2 days prior. He'd gone for a day hike on East Fork Trail, and never returned. The campsite tents were abandoned. The poles collapsed, sleeping bags yanked hellishly toward the fire pit. I felt bile rise as I knelt, fingers sweeping the dew-baked dirt beside the fire pit. A leather-bound journal caught my eye, half covered in pine needles. I flicked off the debris to read scrawled lines. July 10, 2024. Hiked 5.2 miles along East Fork Trail. No sign of family. River ran low. Saw old logging road marker. A rusted sign nailed to a twisted pine. Blackwood Timber, 1931. I felt watched here. My flashlight flickered twice when I passed the Owl's Roost overlook. Footprints, 2 sets, small, to the South Fork campground. Should I keep exploring? I can't leave until I know she's safe. Tucked behind the entry was a snapped pencil, broken at the midpoint. Scribbled in shaky letters on the page above was one word, run. My head snapped up. Tyler's hiker's journal. Last entry pleading to run. Yet he'd never returned. I spread the pages, seeking a date or time, but the ink bled into the paper like it had been submerged. I tapped my radio. Deputy Flores, this is Ranger Whitman. The victim's taken refuge in a cabin along East Fork Trail? He mentioned someone. We need to expand the search. She nodded, brow tight. As we fanned out, searching the nearby brush, something strange happened. My radio crackled again, but instead of dispatch, I heard a faint, whispering echo, like dozens of voices murmuring in unison, too low to distinguish words. My fingers tightened on my flashlight. I scanned the tree-line. Nothing moved. The voices faded into static. I shook my head. I was a park ranger. I dealt with wildlife terror and lost hikers, but never with voices issuing from the air itself. I radioed dispatch Whitman, reporting static interference. All units be advised, might be radio malfunction. Then I continued searching, focusing on the trail's contour, marking footprints in the dust. 2 sets of children's prints circling the campsite, then vanishing near the creek crossing. Spooking myself further, I found a lantern, old battered, with cracked glass, half buried near the creek's bank. Under its handle, carved into the metal collar, were letters LM 1947. A frown. Was someone still using a lantern from 1947? I stare at the rusty carvings, images flickering of a child lost long ago. The world seemed to contract. The forest's wind sighed, stirring the trees into a soft, mournful rustle. My skin prickled. I shoved the lantern into my pack, intending to turn it over to dispatch. Despite my racing pulse, I forced myself to remain calm. The shallow grave, the journal, the lantern, it all pointed to an old tragedy. Maybe Tyler James stumbled on something from decades past. Perhaps a child had drowned in the river long ago, and local legend held that her ghost roamed the East Fork Trail. I tried to rationalize the voices and the footprints and the carving in the tarnished lantern. Yet as the midday sun rose overhead, the forest seemed to watch me with unseen eyes. That afternoon, we found Tyler's body wedged against a boulder in an eddy of the East Fork, his pack smashed beneath jagged granite. The sheriff's divers recovered him, but there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints leading to or from the pool except his, and the circle of tiny prints near the campsite. Deputy Flores turned away as we approached the water. I felt her tense. She'd heard the whispers, too, and saw the lantern in my pack. I told her everything I'd found, the shallow grave, the journal, the lantern's carving. Her expression went pale. We need to close the Enchant Trail at night, she muttered. Something's wrong here. I nodded, but could only think of the 3 words taped to my bunk. Welcome back home. That evening, I returned to my cabin, dreading another night alone. I flicked on a porch light, sending the forest into shadow. Inside, I double-checked the locks, but my fingers trembled as I placed the old lantern on the desk. A low hum filled the air, soulless, resonant, as though vibrating through the floorboards. I stared at the lantern's carved initials, LM 1947. The runes on the carved figurine's base came to mind, too. Each was an echo of something older than me, something that outlasted every ranger I'd ever known. I clicked off the lamp and sat on the edge of my bed, glancing at the ceiling. I was exhausted, haunted by the day's events. The journal's final plea, run, replayed in my mind. Beneath my bunk, the folded scrap of paper with "Welcome Back Home" sat waiting. I inhaled sharply as I noticed a shadow across the window. Someone or something standing in the tree lean just beyond the bright porch lamp. I froze. After a moment, darkness swallowed the figure, and the hum grew into a low chant, soft, teasing, almost human, rising from beneath the floorboards. My mouth went dry. I swallowed, voice barely a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. The chant ceased. The silence seemed deeper than before. I pressed my back against the wall, sliding down to the floor, covering my ears with my hands. But I still heard footsteps outside, a slow, deliberate tread circling the cabin. I pressed my eyes shut, rocking. My radio lay on the desk, but the static it emitted was louder now, rattling through the walls. I heard a gentle scrape at the door, a finger-like scratch dragging across wood. I bolted toward it, yanked it open, and shined my flashlight into the black void. Nothing. Only the porch's weathered boards and the surrounding trees, as still as sentinels. Then, at the edge of the porch light, I saw movement. Something pale, small, crouched near my picnic table, its head turned to me, unmoving. I swallowed and clicked my flashlight's beam again. The beam wavered briefly, like a heartbeat on the brink of failure, then steadied. I aimed at the figure. It was a child, dressed in ragged clothes too large for her. White wool dress stained brown at the hem, a knitted hat pulled low over her forehead. Her face was ghostly pale, eyes sunken hollow, mouth curled into a quivering pout. Her hair was stringy, black as the forest shadows, and tangled in 1,000 knots. She raised one finger, pointing inside the cabin. I shook my head, backing into the threshold. I whimpered, "Go away." My voice cracked. She blinked, head tilted. Then she spoke softly, as though trying to remember the words, "Be home." She smiled, though her lips weren't attached to her gums. They hung slack. Her voice echoed in my mind, bouncing against the walls. "Be home. Be home. Be home." Something in me shattered. I fumbled for the light switch. She vanished, and porch lights sputtered and died. I pounded on the door. I tried to turn the deadbolt, but my hands trembled too violently. The wooden floorboards rattled beneath the weight of something traveling across them, cracks forming near the front steps, the wood bending outward. I realized with a sickening sense that the cabin was built atop a wooden platform. Could it be that the planks were rotting beneath me? And beneath those planks, a space I couldn't see. The chanting began again, soft, distant, rising with the wind, like mournful voices on a breeze. Then a thunk, something heavy falling onto the roof. Then another. Thunk-thunk. I dropped to the floor, curling into a ball, and screamed. The roof groaned. I felt what crack above me, the nails creaking. As my breathing stuttered, I heard the scratching from below, multiple, as though dozens of fingernails were raking beneath the floorboards. I covered my ears and wept until my tears ran dry. Finally, the scratching ceased. The chanting stopped. Only silence reigned. I lay still, listening as the forest stretched beyond the cabin, alive, patient, watching. At dawn, I was gone. I left my keys in the door, left my radio turned off, and drove to the sheriff's station. I never looked back. The sheriff's station was a modest brick building 10 miles north of the canyon's rim. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., eyes red, clothes stained with sweat and dust. Deputy Flores found me in the break room. She poured coffee into a mug, sliding it across the counter without a word. I gripped it, hands trembling, as the steam swirled in front of me. "You okay?" she asked quietly. I nodded, though my voice would not cooperate. She motioned to a bulletin board crowded with photos, missing persons, found belongings, coroner's reports. In the center was a map of Blackwood Canyon, covered in red pins, each marking a location where someone had vanished. My shallow grave, Tyler James, the old logging camp's remains, and now dozens more dating back decades. I swallowed, the mug's warmth an anchor. Something's hunting me, I managed. A child. In my cabin. I saw her, she told me to be home. My voice faltered, and I slumped against the counter. The mug clattered to the floor, coffee sloshing onto the linoleum. Flora knelt to clean it up. "I believe you," she said, tossing a paper towel in the bin. "We've got 5 case files linking to that phrase, 'be home,' scribbled in journals." She lifted a folder from the board, an old case from 1973. A teenage girl named Lydia Monroe disappeared after leaving a note that read exactly that. Her last known location, East Fork Trail. The coroner never found her body. My breath caught in my throat. Lydia Monroe. The name reverberated in my mind. She vanished 52 years ago? Flores nodded. Her disappearance spawned local legend. They called her the lost daughter of Blackwood. She'd been spending summers with her grandparents in Hartman's Creek campground, just below Owl's Roost. One morning, she went hiking. 6 hours later, her parents found her note on the location, "Be home," but she never returned. Chills washed over me. So this child, it's her? She opened another file. 1988. A backpacker named Samuel Cho found Lydia's lantern wedged between 2 boulders at the river's bend. The inscription, LM 1947. He'd swore the lantern glowed on its own. That night, he heard whispers and escaped with minor injuries. But they said he went mad afterward, muttering about voices in the shadows. His file ended with, "Died by suicide, 1992. Flores closed it firmly. Her spirit seems bound to this place. I ran a hand over my face. I found that lantern. And I saw her last night, her ghost, I guess. My voice cracked. What do I do now?" She leaned forward, eyes intense. "You can't go back up there, at least not alone. The forest is luring you, just as it lured Lydia and Tyler, others before them. It wants them to join something." She let the words trail off. "They think there's a hidden cavern beneath the East Fork, an old silver mine abandoned in the 1880s. Some say it collapsed and sealed in those who worked there. Locals believe the lost daughter haunts it with a hunger for company. Once the mine closed, they say the forest reclaimed it, and whoever goes near gets pulled inside, mind and body." My eyes stung as I processed her words. A mine beneath my cabin. How? She unfolded a tattered map, its edges frail. "These are the old survey lines from 1883. That dotted line is the East Fork Trail. Here, just downstream from Jenny Creek Campground, is the shaft's location. Legend says the entrance was hidden by saplings years ago. The mine's tunnels run under the canyon floor, erode with the groundwater, forming cavities. She traced a branch of tunnels leading directly beneath the ranger cabin. And here, about 8 feet under your floor, my stomach lurched. So when I felt the nails creak, when the floorboards bowed, it wasn't the weight of ghosts. It was the ground shifting. My voice trailed off. She nodded grimly. The displacement happens when the caverns weaken. The forest above it responds. Trees fall. Earth trembles. That's how it captures people. This whole canyon was built on top of collapsing mine shafts. She folded the map. You saw footprints around your cabin. Those children's prints, it's Lydia's ghost, seeking someone to take her place so she can move on. Tyler James stumbled too close. The little girl under the porch now wants you. My jaw pressed tight. She's luring me. I can't go back. My voice broke. I don't have to die, right? Flores placed a hand on my shoulder. There's a way to stop it. Find her remains and give her a proper burial. Without a body, her spirit's bound to the mine. Free her, maybe Forrest comes. You'll need help. For centuries, this place has seen people vanish. None have properly laid her to rest. You might have a chance. I swallowed hard. The idea of burials, evidence, spiritual release, these weren't in any ranger's manual. But it was the only hope. What about the mine entrance? We need to find it. Flores' lips tightened. Rangers tried that in 2001. They collapsed the main shaft to seal it, but a secondary entrance exists upstream. We have to lure it out and close it permanently, or risk more disappearances. And hopefully Lydia's spirit can be freed. My chest tightened. How do we lure her out? She met my eyes. You must call her name at the mine's mouth. Draw her out into the light. Take the lantern. If she appears, we bring her remains, cradle them in that lantern, and set them on a pyre. Burn them outside the forest line. It's the only way her spirit is free, and the mine's curse broken. I nodded. Every instinct screamed I was dancing on the edge of death. But glancing at the map, knowing the cave lay just beneath my cabin, under my feet, gave a cold clarity. I'd already glimpsed Lydia's pale face. Since that night, the forest claimed even the air had grown thicker. If I didn't act now, I might never get another chance. All right, I said. Let's do it. Dusk settled over Blackwood Canyon as Flores and I drove to the trailhead. I sat silent in my truck, hugging a battered canvas duffel containing a high-intensity lantern, flares, a shovel, ropes, and a small box of purification herbs and salts, odd items Flores insisted might cleanse the area. We parked near the Jenny Creek trailhead, just a mile from the ranger cabin, and loaded our gear onto our shoulders. A chill wind swept down the canyon, rattling branches like skeletal fingers. At first light, we looked for the collapsed shaft upstream, Flores said, gesturing to a ridge of fallen boulders half hidden beneath brush. If the mine's still open there, we might coax her out. Remember, call her name Lydia Monroe. Only then will the entrance react. I nodded, heart hammering. We set off up the narrow trail, the river's roar below us replaced by silence, so thick I could hear my own footsteps echo on the rocky path. Ahead, we found a tree smashed sideways, an enormous pine fractured at the trunk. Its broken roots sheared the soil, revealing a vertical gap between stones, just wide enough for a person to slip through. This was it, the secondary mine entrance. I stepped closer, shining my lantern into the chasm. The light revealed decaying timbers, evidence of a support beam long since rotted. Water dripped from above in a steady rhythm, each drop echoing in the gloom. Flores spoke into her radio. "Sheriff's Department, this is Deputy Flores. We found the secondary shaft. No sign of other personnel." Crickets responded from the darkness. The air was frigid despite summer's heat. Moisture coated my uniform. My lantern's beam quivered as I aimed it down the shaft. Wooden planks lay strewn across the mouth, half sunken into wet gravel. I felt the weight of unseen eyes in the darkness. It hit me with full force. I was standing above the grave of the lost daughter, above the site where her spirit roamed for 52 years. I fumbled in my duffel, pulling out the lantern with LM 1947 carved on its base. I held it aloft, letting its flickering light spill across the fractured stones. A surge of dread coiled in my gut. Flores crouched beside me. "Ready?" she whispered. I nodded, swallowing. "Lydia Monroe," she called into the shaft, voice steady. "We know you're here. Come home to us." Her words floated down into the abyss. Seconds passed. We waited. Then, soft at first, like a ripple of air, a child's voice responded. "Must come, must come." It rose from below, echoed by shuffling feet. My hair prickled as the voice repeated, fainter, "Come home, come home, come home." Flores shined a headlamp down the shaft. At first, we saw only rotting beams and dripping water. Then a small hand appeared, gripping a rotted plank. It slid upward, followed by an arm, and slowly a form emerged, a pale skeletal child, soaked in water and mud, her dress tattered, eyes sunk in black hollows. She climbed the rocks with slow, fluid motions, like a diver rising through water, until she stood before us. I swallowed hard, stepping back. The lantern's flame sputtered. The girl's face was twisted with sorrow and anger. She opened her mouth as though to cry, but no sound emerged, only a whisper in my head, "Take me home." Her finger pointed at me, then at the lantern's basin. My breath caught. She wanted me to hold the lantern. Flores raised a hand to stop me. "Don't." But I was already stepping forward. I knelt and held the lantern by its handle. The child's lips curled into a twisted smile. She extended her hand, palm upward. From the corner of my eye, I saw Flores take out a small burlap sack containing shards of bone-dried, brittle fragments they'd recovered from Tyler James's campsite after he drowned. They were marked to the coroner's seal as belonging to an unidentified juvenile. I understood. This was Lydia's remains, mixed with river silt. It was our only chance to put her to rest. I felt bile rise as I scooped the shards into the lantern's basin. The fragments looked like puzzle pieces. The girl's eyes followed every motion, and tears of water trickled down her translucent cheeks. Once the lantern was full of bone, I snapped the lid shut. Light pulsed through the cracks, illuminating the runes carved into the lantern's side, runic glyphs that glowed gold in the gloom. The girl's eyes glittered with hope. She reached out, touching the lantern's lid with cold, rotting fingers. A sudden breeze whipped through the shaft, wind strong enough to snuff out the lantern, yet the flame blazed brighter. The girl's body convulsed as the fragments seeped into her palm, like fish being drawn into a net. She gasped, exhaling a soft cry. The runes flared, and a searing heat radiated from the lantern, scorching the cavern's walls. Plumes of dust and silt filled the air as the mine quaked. Timbers splintered as though under immense weight. I jumped to my feet, clutching the lantern. Flores grabbed my arm. "We need to move." she yelled over the sound of crumbling earth. We turned, backing away from the shaft, as dust and pebbles rained around us, the tunnel's mouth collapsing inward with a final, shuddering groan that reverberated up through the canyon. From behind us came a soft, fading echo, "Thank you," and when I dared to glance back, the pale child was gone. In her place lay only a pool of shallow, silty water, rippling in perfect stillness. My heart thundered, chest heaving, as I looked at the lantern. The lid snapped tight, its flame flickering as though in gentle gratitude. Florence nodded, eyes wide. "She's gone." I stare at the collapsed shaft, bits of splintered wood jutting like broken teeth. A triumphant ache surged through me. For the first time in days, I felt the forest release its breath. I managed a shaky smile, steps unsteady on the sloping trail. "Let's burn this," I said, patting the lantern's handle. "Get her home." We emerged from the canyon just as the sun dipped below the western ridge, painting the sky in blood-red streaks. The forest around us seemed to glow in deep indigo, the last remnants of daylight dying in the sky. In my pack, I carried the lantern with Lydia's remains sealed inside, and in my mind, the echo of her final whisper, "Thank you." Florence led me to a clearing a few miles from the park boundary, where a small bonfire had been prepared. We set the lantern on a flat rock at the edge of the flames. Deputy Flores held a bag of dried sage and sprinkled leaves around the lantern, then laid the bone fragments atop the coals. As the fire swallowed them, a sudden gust of wind fanned the flames, sending embers soaring into the darkening sky. For a moment, the fire's glow looked like 1,000 eyes blinking across the treetops. I watched as the lantern's runes glowed one last time, an incandescent gold, before the metal heated until it glowed red, then turned gray with ash. The shards of bone curled into cinders and smoke spiraled upward, carrying the remains into the night air. The scents of burning sage and smoke mingled, creating a sweet tang that stung my nostrils. Behind me, the forest exhaled. The trees seemed to sigh, their leaves settling in a hush. The wind died down, the distant river's roar quieted to a distant murmur. In the fire's flicker, Florence exhaled a shuddering breath. "She's free," she whispered. "The forest will rest." I nodded numbly, hands trembling, as the lantern's remains sank into glowing embers. The runes on its face vanished into charcoal. I thought of the cabin, the fractured floorboards, the child on the porch, Lydia Monroe's ghost, tethered to the mine. Now I'd given her remains the ritual she deserved. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from fear, but relief for the first time in weeks. Suddenly, I heard a familiar soft voice at my shoulder. "Whitman." I whirled around, heart racing, but saw only the bonfire's glow. No one stood behind me. A chill skittered across my skin. I brushed it off as the night's cool air, but as I looked around, catching the glint of the river down below, I realized the forest had changed. The trees stood straighter, and the clearing felt warmer, safer, as though healed by the ritual. I exhaled, pushing my hair away from my face. "She's gone," I murmured into the darkness. "Lydia's free." Florence came up behind me, laying a hand on my shoulder. "You did well," she said quietly. "You gave her a home beyond the forest." She gestured at the dying embers. "I think that's the last of it." A sudden rustle in the underbrush made both of us jump. We trained our flashlights in unison, illuminating the trees. A fox darted across the clearing's edge, disappearing as quickly as it came. The forest stilled again, as though waiting for something else. I let out a shaky laugh. "I guess I need a real vacation now." My voice sounded foreign, oddly light. I dropped to one knee and poked at the lantern's blackened remnants. The metal was cold to the touch, Everything, every footprint, every cry, had been left behind in the charred cinders. Flores handed me a canteen. I took a long drink of water, letting the cool liquid soothe my parched throat. Cinder dust lined my lips. I glanced at the blackened lantern one last time. Be gone. Then I rose and turned away from the fire, stepping into the forest edge, where a narrow trail wound up toward Blackwood Canyon Road. Flores followed, and together we walked in near silence, each step a reminder of what we had lost and what we had saved. The drive back to Blackwood Canyon Ranger Station was quiet. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the dark shapes of pine trees that lined the narrow road. Flores drove, her headlights carving arcs through the darkness. Even the moon had hidden behind clouds as if exhausted by the day's ordeal. I felt empty, disconnected from everything I once knew. The old cabin, the creaking floorboards, the crying in the night. All of it gone. We reached the station around midnight. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee and pine cleaner washing over me. The reception desk sat empty, lights dimmed. I flicked on the overhead fluorescents, and brightened bulbs hummed overhead, revealing the dusty cots in the bunk room. I paused, noticing that my bunk lay undisturbed, no footprint near it, no scrap of paper taped to it. The words "Welcome back home" had vanished, erased by something I couldn't quite explain. Flores emerged from the bathroom, handing me a paper cup of coffee. The cafeteria down the hall was closed, so she'd brewed from a thermos. I took the cup, letting the warmth sink into my palms. I sipped slowly, tasting the faint bitterness that grounded me in reality. She crossed her arms. "What now?" she asked. I considered her question. "We close the mine," I said quietly. "We seal it for good, and we clean up the campsite. The shallow grave, the lantern, everything." My voice was steady now, resolute. "And I need a break. Maybe some training at HQ." Flores nodded. "Good. The sheriff's department will supervise the sealing. I'll take over your district while you're gone. Just don't go back to that cabin, Whitman. It's done with you." I nodded. Relief pooled inside me like cool water. I had no desire to return. The cabin was a place of horrors. She had freed Lydia's spirit, and in the process, the mine's curse ended. But for me, Blackwood Canyon remained a patchwork of memories, some beautiful, some stained with terror. I drank the last of the coffee. The station's clock ticked past 12:45 a.m. I yawned, rubbing my eyes. I should get some sleep. First light, I'll send the coordinates to the sheriff. Flores reached for the ragged map on the bulletin board. Beneath it, she wrote the mine's grid reference in red marker: 32.1484 degrees north, 110.4709 degrees west. Then she removed the map and rolled it into her pack. I opened the radio's desk mic Ranger Whitman to dispatch. "I'm logging off effective immediately. All units, mine shafts sealed. The ghost of Lydia Monroe is laid to rest. Ranger Flores is in charge of my patrol sector until further notice." Over. Static hissed. Then a familiar voice crackled through. "Copy that. Whitman, you did good. Stay safe." Over. I placed the mic back on its cradle and stretched. As I walked down the corridor toward the bunk room, I caught my reflection in a glass notice board. Pale face, wide eyes, a ranger uniform with my name patch still pinned to my chest. The weight of months of dread lifted like summer fog burned off by the sun. I allowed myself a small smile. In the hallway, a single sheet of white paper lay, taped to the wall new, absent the familiar flicker of runes. In neat block letters, someone had typed, Thank you, Ranger. The forest is at peace. I exhaled, relief flooding me. I turned and climbed the stairs to the bunk room. My bed lay neatly made, but I didn't bother to change. I pulled back the covers and lay down, leaving my uniform on. Tomorrow, I could consider a permanent reassignment. Tonight, for the first time in weeks, I let sleep find me without dread. As I drifted off, I heard a whisper in my mind, soft, delicate, lilting. Be home, be home, be home. But it was no longer a threat. It was a farewell. I let it guide me into unconsciousness, and in my dreams, the canyon was silent, the forest at rest. 2 months later, I stood at the edge of a sagebrush meadow 20 miles east of Blackwood Canyon. The searing desert day pressed down, and sun-warped heat rippled off the distant mountains. I was still a park ranger, transferred to Tonto Basin National Recreation Area, thousands of acres of arid hills, juniper pines, and saguaro cacti. The air was different here, dry, brittle, and nothing creaked, whispered, or shifted beneath the soles of my boots. The mountains stood chiseled against the sky, rock-hard and unflinching. The transition had not been easy. I'd spent weeks in counseling, recounting every detail of Lydia Monroe's case, each echoing whisper, every tremor beneath my cabin floor. But with the mind sealed and her remains laid to rest, the nightmares receded. I missed Blackwood Canyon sometimes, the rushing river, the smell of pine resin, even the hush that came before the screams. But I learned to let go. In Tonto Basin, I guided tourists through Joshua Tree groves and patrolled the cracked river channel. There were no abandoned mines here, no haunted cabins. Occasionally, I glimpsed a child's laughter drifting across a canyon, but I never saw her face. I didn't look for it. Today, a group of visitors hiked with me along the Fish Creek Trail, a narrow canyon path that led to a deep chasm where water pooled in hidden grottos. We paused at an overlook to catch our breath, and I pointed out the rugged contours of the Red Rock Cliffs, stratified like layers of time itself. A young girl in the group tugged at her mother's hand and asked about coyotes, oblivious to the hush above. I smiled as she skipped across the trail. Something about her reminded me of Lydia Monroe. Her boundless curiosity, the way her hat fell over her eyes as she peered into the chasm. I bit my lip, chest tightening for an instant. Had I learned nothing? Was I destined to chase ghosts? The girl turned to me and asked, "Ranger, do you think there are spirits in these canyons?" I swallowed, glancing at the sunlit cliffs behind her. "I've learned that places hold memories," I said slowly. "And sometimes those memories linger, like whispers in the wind. Mostly, though, these canyons just hold shells of rock and sand." I paused, realizing she expected more. "But if you believe, you might see shadows where no one stands. And maybe that's okay." She nodded solemnly, as if accepting the possibility. I guided the group onward, deeper into the canyon's mouth. My radio crackled briefly, dispatch updating trail closure for a rattlesnake sighting. Nothing supernatural, only a real danger we regularly faced. I felt a surge of relief, life as a ranger offering clear, tangible challenges. That night, in my small cabin near Fish Creek, I sat on the porch under a sky pricked by a billion stars. The desert's hush stretched out, infinite and dark. No footprints circled my door. No whispers tugged at my mind. I took a deep breath, scenting dust and sage. I reached into my pocket and touched the empty space where the lantern had once been stored. No cold metal, no runes. Just a faint, comforting memory of what once was. As I stared into the star-scattered sky, a gentle breeze rustled the saguaros, sounding like a distant sigh. I closed my eyes and remembered Lydia Monroe, no longer a tormented spirit, but a part of the forest story. I whispered into the air, "Goodbye." A hush answered me, serene and unwavering. I let the silence fill me, welcoming it as a sign that the forest, the desert, and I could finally rest. The ghosts of the past would stay there, protected by sealed entrances, smoldering embers, and the quiet promise of remembrance never to return. And as I turned inside and closed the door, I felt a gentle peace settle over me. The forest of Blackwood Canyon had finally laid its dead daughter to rest. And I, Ranger Whitman, had found my own path to a new beginning. I've always believed the forest watches us as much as we watch it. As a ranger at Cedar Shade National Park for the past 4 years, I've hiked every trail at dawn, patrolled every clearing at dusk, and kept the signage clear of vandals and hikers alike. I prided myself on knowing the land better than anyone. But on the morning of October 3rd, 2024, when the first frost whispered across the pines, I realized how little I truly understood what hides beneath the bark and bramble. The day started like any other. Crisp air, a stake of sunlight cutting through the heavy mist along the Lost Creek Trail. I'd risen at 5 a.m. to catch the sunrise from the old observation tower, camera in hand to photograph migrating warblers. By 7:30 a.m., I was back at the ranger station, logging ranger mileage and updating my shift report. The storm front was brewing, high winds and heavy rain expected that evening, so I decided to do an early run of the North Fork sector, checking trail markers and clearing fallen limbs before the storm hit. At 9:45 a.m., I drove up the gravel access road toward the Cedar Shade Ridge trailhead. My radio crackled with routine chatter, a hiker reporting a lost glove, a family asking for swim conditions at Whispering Lake, nothing out of the ordinary. The forest seemed peaceful, almost too quiet. By the time I reached the turning for North Fork Trail, I felt that familiar tug at my neck, the sensation of eyes just beyond my peripheral vision. I parked, stepped out, and inhaled the pine-scented air. The canopy glowed pale gold as the sun filtered through thinning leaves. It was the first morning frost, and the fallen needles shimmered like stars across the ground. I locked my truck and shouldered my pack, mentally listing the tasks ahead. Inspect trail markers 27 through 36, clear brush from the creek crossing, verify signage at Pine Hollow Bridge. I walked a few yards down the trail, listening to distant woodpeckers, then noticed an old, twisted sapling ahead, its bark peeled back to reveal fresh wood beneath. The track veered around it, where footprints pressed into the dust. 2 sizes, one adult, one small, child-sized. My brow furrowed. No one reported lost hikers. I bent to examine the prints. The adult set was booted, my style of standard issue, but with no ranger insignia. The child prints were bare toes, tiny, and curving in a line that led away from the trail deeper into the pines. I stood and swept my flashlight up the trail, though daylight needed no beam, and saw nothing but sun-flecked bark and brush. A sudden rustle came from the undergrowth to my right. I spun, drawing a shaky breath. A cloud of sparrow-sized birds burst from the scrub, white flash of wings, then silence. I shook my head. Probably a family of bobcats or deer. I took a few steps to resume my patrol, but something caught my eye. A scrap of cloth, pale blue, caught on a low branch. I approached and recognized it instantly. A fragment of a child's jacket I'd seen sold at the general store in Cedar Shade Village. I picked it up. The fabric was damp, stiff with dew. On one edge was a smudge of red blood, faint but unmistakable. My heart pounded. I shoved the cloth into my pocket and hailed dispatch. "C to Shade Dispatch. This is Ranger Hayes. I found possible child's clothing on North Fork Trail at marker 27. Suspect someone off trail. Over." My voice sounded hollow. The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Ranger Hayes. Are you safe?" Over. I glanced around the empty forest. "I'm fine, but I'm investigating. I'll keep you updated." Over. I continued along the trail, senses on high alert, expecting to find a lost child or at least an abandoned campsite. But as I neared marker 28, a weathered post barely visible beneath thorny underbrush, I saw something I won't ever forget. A small pair of boots, leather caked in mud, dangling from a low branch, tied together at the laces. The boots swung gently in the morning breeze as though someone had looped them their days or weeks earlier. I stifled a gasp and took a step back. Beneath the branch lay something pale and half-buried, the heel of a child's shoe, a single sock ejected, smeared with blood. My stomach clenched. I dropped to my knees, gently brushing aside dead needles, uncovering a scuffed red sneaker. It was too small to be mine. It belonged to a child, maybe 6 years old. My breath caught. Then I noticed a second boot next to it, unpaired. No sock, like it had been torn from a foot. The mud around them was freshly churned, the impressions deep. Whoever or whatever was out here, they left a trail of evidence too clear to ignore. I radioed again, voice trembling. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Hayes. We have human remains, likely juvenile, North Fork Trail, marker 28. I need immediate backup and coroner." Over. Silence answered me. Then the dispatch's voice returned, soft. "Copy that. Units are en route. Do not disturb the scene." Over. I exhaled, pushing to my feet. I didn't know yet if there was a body to match the boots or if the child had been carried off. But as I turned, the forest around me seemed to shift. The pines leaned in, the shadows lengthened. An urgent impulse told me to get out, but I forced myself to stay. I had a job to do. The forest might hide many things, but it couldn't hide human lives from us. Somehow deep down, I knew that wasn't exactly true. By 10:15 a.m., the sheriff's patrol SUV and coroner's van rumbled up the trail, brakes squealing on gravel. I met Sheriff Carter at marker 29, a few hundred yards downhill. He was a tall man, broad shoulders, deep lines etched around his mouth from too many early mornings. His partner, Deputy Wu, leaned against the car, eyes dark with concern. The coroner, Dr. Voss, stood near a white tent already erected at marker 28. "I saw your call," Carter said quietly as I approached. "We got here as fast as we could." "You all right?" The soft concern in his voice made me want to lie and say I was fine. Instead, I nodded. "I'm okay, Sheriff." It looked like a child's remains, boot, sock. I found a jacket fragment, too. He studied me with a slight furrowed brow. "Let's have you point out exactly where you found it." I led them down the path, each step making the forest feel colder, as though the mist had thickened around us. When we reached the boots and the coroner's tent, Dr. Voss was already crouched by the branch, photographing everything, the boots dangling, the shoe on the ground, the smear of blood on the cloth fragment. He paused, lifting a gloved hand. "Ranger Hayes, do you recognize these? Have you seen this child before?" I swallowed. I didn't see a child. Only the boots and the jacket scrap. No campsite, no backpack, no sign of an adult. Just these. I unzipped my jacket slightly and pulled out the pale blue cloth. "Saw this at marker 27. I felt Carter's eyes on me. I was doing routine patrol, clear fallen limbs, inspect signage. Heard something rustling, noticed prints. Then the cloth. I followed the trail. I'm not sure how far it led, but it brought me here. Dr. Voss nodded, face grave. We'll need to get a positive ID. If this is from a recent missing child case, we need to act fast. Do you know of any kids reported missing in the area? I shook my head. Not recently. Last report was 3 weeks ago. An 8-year-old girl, Mallory Jensen, wandered off. She said she heard voices calling her name. She was found at dusk near Cedarshade Lake. This is north. No one's reported a child missing in this canyon sector. My heart pounded. If Mallory had wandered here, how had she ended up so far off? And if not Mallory, who? Deputy Wu spoke for the first time, voice low. Sheriff, there's something else. He pointed to the ground ahead. Footprints. 2 sets, adult and child, circling in worn dirt, heading off trail into that thicket. He shone his flashlight into the undergrowth. I've been to inspect. Muddy impressions pressed in a small clearing, roughly 10 feet from the trail. The adult prints were booted, heavy, the tread shallow at the heels, like someone had been leaning forward. The child prints, barefoot and tiny, spiraled in circles, confused. Carter knelt beside them. Looks fresh, maybe overnight, maybe early this morning. He rose, face grim. Get Parks and Rec on the radio. Tell them I want the comms van to base camp here. We'll start a grid search along North Fork. In the meantime, Dr. Voss, can you give me an ETA on identification? Dr. Voss adjusted his camera. I'll bag the boots and sock, take them back to the lab. We'll run prints, check for DNA. Should have an answer in 24 hours if a match shows up. In the meantime, we need to search this trail thoroughly. Ranger Hayes, could you canvass the area between markers 28 and 31? Look for anything out of the ordinary, shredded clothing, hair, toys, notes, anything a child might have left. He turned to Wu. Devote at least 2 deputies to grid the uphill slope, dense brush, maybe a hidden campsite. I nodded, gloved up, and walked a few steps back up the trail. My mind raced. Had someone abducted a child, dragged her deep into the forest before dawn? Who would do such a thing here, a remote section rarely used at this hour? And what was the adult's mood who'd passed this way? I crouched at the base of the twisted sapling where I'd found footprints earlier. I recovered a twig with a red smudge, likely the same blood I'd seen on the jacket scrap. I dropped it into an evidence bag. I glanced around, half expecting to catch movement among the yellowing ferns. But the forest remained eerily silent. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals. Only the lean spines of pines swaying in the morning breeze. I pressed on toward marker 29, eyeballing every tree trunk, every cracked branch. The trail curved downward, sloping gently toward a rock outcropping. I noticed what I'd missed on my first pass, a small child's backpack, pink, covered in mud, caught on a downward slanted boulder. I rushed forward and carefully untangled it. Its zipper was half open. The interior was empty except for a smudged water bottle and a tattered paperback titled The Little Wood Switch's Tea Party. The cover was stained, the pages near the spine soaked through. I closed it gently and placed it in a new evidence bag. My heart ached as I recalled the last time I'd read that book to my niece when she was 6. I swallowed hard. Whoever was here took the child's backpack, but had they dragged the backpack off to hide it, or had the child dropped it and tried to run? Beyond the rock, I saw footprints leading uphill, pressed into soft soil, now damp with dew. I followed them until I reached a narrow ravine. too steep to navigate without risking a fall. The prince stopped at its edge, as though someone had paused, assessed the drop, and then turned back. Yet I'd seen the boots hanging from a branch further down. Why retrace steps? Something wasn't right. A buzz came from my radio. "Hayes, this is Carter. Deputies have found a small campsite just east of Marker 31. 3 children's shoes, 1 adult's. No sign of a tent, but campfire stained in ash and blood traces on stones. They'll be there in 10. Come back to base camp." His voice was taut. I exhaled and scrambled down the trail, picking my way over exposed roots. The forest around me felt so still, so watchful, as though afraid to breathe. At base camp, Marker 28, Deputy Wu waved me over. Beyond him, I saw the campsite, a ring of stones, scorched twigs, a few charred marshmallows on one rock. Scattered around were 3 small shoes, pink sneakers, scuffed and wet, a floral sandal, strap torn, a little crock, melted at the tip as though held too close to fire. Next to them lay a small plastic doll, its hair singed. My stomach twisted. Dr. Voss knelt by the campfire, swirling a gloved finger through the ash. "This fire's maybe 24 hours old, could be older, given the storm forecast. But these burn marks," he touched the doll's melted hair, "look fresh. Someone used this fire last night, possibly as a lure or trap." He closed his eyes. "My guess, someone killed the child here." I felt bile rise. Carter stood nearby, scanning the perimeter with his flashlight, deputies combing the undergrowth. "Hayes, you found the boots. Now we have 3 shoes. That suggests this child's been here since last night. Maybe someone brought her here intentionally." I swallowed. There's no sign of restraint, no rope or chains. I knelt, examining the fire pit. But there's blood on these stones. Looks like she was pinned here. My fingers traced a smear of dark red across a blackened stone, then taken somewhere else. Deputy Wu called out. "Might be more. Found a small pile of feathers, like from a pillow, near the creek bank." I hurried to the creek. It was a shallow ribbon of icy water, winding through fallen logs and mossy stones. I spotted a crumpled pillow, feathers spilling like snowflakes among the ferns. I picked it up, fresh tear along one seam, dark stains where down had mixed with crimson. A cold realization washed over me. It wasn't just a campsite. Someone had used a pillow, maybe forced the child to sleep on the ground, or worse. I felt my fingers go numb. My phone buzzed with a text from the Parks and Rec dispatch, units inbound. Expecting aerial search team in 1 hour. I steeled myself. "Sheriff, I think someone's hiding the child somewhere deeper in the forest. We need canine teams. We need to suppress the storm." My words came out fervent. "This trail is the only lead. Whoever did this is still here." Carter nodded grimly. "You're right. Wu, get canine units en route. Hayes, I want you at the North Ridge with me. Coordinate the grid search. Keep your radio hot. Dr. Voss, bag all evidence and stay here until we instruct otherwise." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Hayes. Use caution." I exhaled, standing slowly. The forest swallowed us in its hush. Above, the sky was steel gray. The wind began to stir, as though anticipating the trouble bursting forth. Our first thunderclap echoed across the treetops. I felt the forest tighten its grip around us, waiting for our next move. By midday, the cedar-scented wind had soured into a chill gale. Clouds rolled in like battle lines, and raindrops the size of marbles began to patter on my hood. I pulled on rain pants over my uniform and checked my GPS coordinates. Marker 29. Sheriff Carter and I stood on a small ridge, binoculars sweeping the North Fork Valley below. Teams of deputies scour the underbrush in parallel lines, flashlights bobbing as shadows lengthened. Two canines, German shepherds trained for tracking, surged back and forth, noses to the ground, steeds of prey frozen in their tracks. I patted my rain-bleached jacket for field notes and glanced at the embedded first aid kit in my pack. Carter's voice crackled over the radio. "Hayes, any sign yet?" "Over." I raised my hand to respond, but realized my radio was dead, battery drained. I clicked the button hard. No response. I slung the pack off my shoulders, pulled the portable cable from the side pocket, and jammed it into the handset. No static, no beeps, just the faint hiss of water in the microphone. Great. This remote patch of forest had no signal and no power. I stuffed it back and stuck close to Carter. "Look for movement," I muttered as the canines suddenly lifted their heads in unison, ears pricked. The dogs bolted forward, leashes trailing behind their handlers. I watched, exhaling, as the shepherds barreled off through a stand of firs. Moments later, one of them emitted a low whine, then dashed back toward us, barking. The handler shook the leash, then scrambled up the slope. "Sheriff, they found something," I shouted over the growing wind. Carter raised a hand to the ridge, signaling the other deputies to take cover. I rushed down toward where the handler pointed. The shepherd's paws churned mud as it circled the trunk, tail wagging. My heart pounded as I parted branches to reveal a blood-smeared jacket, tiny pink-flecked, shredded along the seam. I recognized it as belonging to a girl no older than 6. The handler knelt beside it, careful not to damage evidence. "Ranger Hayes, this matches the fragment you found, same brand stitching." "Copy." He lowered his voice. "A child wore this." He pointed downstream. I followed the scent, which went that way. He motioned a narrow game trail, leading off the riverbank. Footprints, bare footprints pressed into the water-worn soil, led away. I felt bile rise as I knelt, brushing my gloved hand across the jacket. The smell of blood and wet fur was heavy. I touched the hem. The red stain was still fresh. Underneath lay a scrap of paper, scribbled in crayon. Rounded letters spelled help. My breath caught. A harsh gust tore through the trees, driving raindrops into my face. I rose and turned to Carter. "They've taken her downstream, somewhere off Lost Pine Ridge." I pointed at the ridge in the distance, silhouetted against the darkening sky. "We need to split and circle." He nodded, calling out, "Hayes, you go west to the river crossing." "I'll flank south." "Wu, take east. Dog units, hang back near the water. You might get better scent if the wind shifts." I dashed up the slope, boots spilling out chunks of mud. Each step echoed in my chest, heart banging like a war drum. In my mind, I saw a little girl's face, wide brown eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, someone who should have been in school, not running for her life. Reaching the river crossing, I spotted a half-sunken log bridging the current, a precarious crossing. I slid down to the bank, glancing upstream. The water was a churning ribbon of brown. Raindrops hammered its surface. I paused, holding onto a low-hanging branch to steady myself. The game trail continued along the bank, half submerged. A single footprint in the mud, huge compared to the jacket's hem, a man's boot angled away from the crossing. I followed it, tracking against the current's roar, until I reached a spindly spruce clump where the ground flattened into a small clearing. Behind the trees, a makeshift shelter, saplings bent into a rough dome, covered with ferns and brush, too small for an adult, perfectly sized for a child. Inside, a tattered blanket, knocked over can of baby formula, and a small teddy bear missing an arm. The teddy's cotton-stuffed torso bore a thick red stain. Fear overwhelmed me. I skimmed the ground, finding torn pages from the little Wood Switch's tea party, scrawled over with childish pencil. Don't trust the man in the shadows. My throat tightened. I radioed Carter, voice urgent. He's made camp, unfinished shelter off North Fork, about 10 yards from the bank. Bring backup. I'm marking smoke. I ripped a small flare from my pack, striking it on the ridge. Green smoke spiraled into the gray sky. I ducked behind a birch as bullets popped overhead, not at me, but farther down the ridge. Someone firing at the dog units, chasing them away from the scent. I swallowed hard and edged back toward the shelter. The killer had shot at us. He wanted the child to stay hidden. The sudden creak behind me made me spin. A second flare. Red shot skyward from a deputy's location downstream. Carter's attempt to flank, but likely forced back by gunshots. The wind howled, sending the green smoke twisting at odd angles. I crept along the bank, hugging the cover of spruce and cedar. My radio crackled. Hayes, this is Carter. I had to fall back. No clear shot on foot. He's armed and dangerous. Expect multiple rounds. Back off and we'll call it in. Over. My stomach clenched. The search had gone sideways. He was moving the child. Too late to save her, maybe. My hands shook as the sky opened in earnest. A wall of rain hammered the leaves. Each droplet hit my face like a white-hot pin. I squeezed my flashlight's handle, thinking of my last words. Don't trust the man in the shadows. I reminded myself of tactics. Never follow his trail alone. Never chase blindly. But every instinct screamed to find her now. I raised my radio. Sheriff, I'm going after him. Static answered me. No response. My blood ran cold. The forest had swallowed the call. I tucked the radio away, stuffing a handful of tracking powder in my coat pocket. Maybe it could leave a trail. I set off, charging down the muddy bank, feet slipping on wet ground. Branches whipped against my face, tearing at my jacket. Shouts from deputies echoed like distant thunder, mixed with the crack of gunshots. Each echo drove me forward. I reached the next bend in the river and saw them. The man crouched on the opposite bank, dragging the child over slick stones. She was limp, her head lolling, hair dripping. He pressed a hand over her mouth, dragging her deeper into the forest, away from view. I raised my voice, shouting, "Stop. Let me see that girl." But the thunder and rain swallowed me. He turned his head, just a tilt, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. The wind blew his collar open, an ISIS rope tied around it. Symbol of father's gift? No, that was the victim from the previous case. This rope was braided with garnets, an ornamental lanyard I recognized from the park's promotional pamphlet. It had belonged to a volunteer in summer camp back in June, one who had vanished with childlike footprints circling his campsite. My blood froze again. He must have taken her as the volunteer's final act, like some monstrous rite. He dragged her toward a stand of fallen red furs. I squared my shoulders. Hayes backed down. Carter's voice crackled suddenly, breaking through the static. Relief surged. But if you can make it to the old mill site, set up an ambush. I'll pin him from the north. Over. I exhaled, grateful. I ran, mud spattering my boots, toward where the forest floor leveled out an old crumbling sawmill foundation I'd inspected last spring. Its stone walls still stood, moss-covered, nestled in a clearing. The rain poured, and the wind rocked cedar boughs like a cradle. My heart thundered as I sloshed through shallow rivulets carving paths between fallen logs. I reached the mill ruins and took cover behind a fallen beam, pulling up mud to sift for fresh prints. The child's booted footprints led down the embankment, where the creek bent sharply north. I pressed my face against the beam and peered through tunnel-shaped gaps in the timber. The man reappeared, tall and gaunt, dragging the child by her jacket collar. She mumbled something incoherent. Her small hands flailed. I aimed my flashlight, hoping the flare from the river had guided Carter. My radio buzzed. Hayes, we're closing in. Flash your light once. I clicked the switch. A thin beam stretched into the murk. Instantly, I saw movement above. Carter's silhouette on the ridge, pistol drawn. He was halfway across a log, bridging the ravine. Below, the man paused, looking upstream. He spotted Carter's silhouette, then ducked, pulling the child behind a stump. I raised my radio. He's heading my way, going to circle me. Watch your left. Carter's response was lost in static. Rain hammered the shed roof overhead. I took a breath and edged around the beam, stepping onto a narrow ledge of stone. My boots slipped, heart lurching, but I regained balance. The man emerged from behind the stump, dragging the child toward what looked like a collapsed tunnel, an entrance to an abandoned gold mine from the 1800s. Their path angled closer to the mill ruins. The child's small frame hung like a rag doll, legs dragging. Her shirt was torn at the shoulder. I swallowed, backpack sliding on my back. A voice snarled behind me, low, guttural, "Don't move." The man's silhouette filled the opening. The girl's face was pale, eyes half-lidded, tear tracks drying. The raindrops stuck to her cheeks like shattered glass. I froze, heart racing. This was it, the rescue attempt, the moment when everything would end. Carter's voice came from the ridge. "Hayes, wait. Don't engage unless necessary." He's got her close to the tunnel. I slipped a hand onto my baton. Standard issue, but heavy with intent. The man advanced, just a step, jagged in the warped light. The child's head lolled. Her lips parted, help, a single fragile plea that glued me to the spot. It all happened in a breath. The man raised a rusted hunting knife, blood-stained from previous hunts. Carter raised his rifle, taking aim. I lunged forward, shouting, "No!" The wind screamed, a gunshot cracked, and the knife veered away from the child's body. He felt Carter's bullet-breaking branches above. I tackled him, wrenching the child free. My baton crushed against his forearm. He howled, kicking at me as I rolled him into the muddied floor. The child slipped free, and I scooped her into my arms, a trembling 8-year-old bundle of wet clothes and fear. Her eyes fluttered open. I pressed my cheek to hers, murmuring, "You're safe now." Carter appeared behind me, lowering his rifle. He glanced at the man pinned beneath me, bleeding from a deep gash across his forearm, probably from the baton. He looked at the child, then to my face. "Let's get her out." I rose, cradling the girl against my chest. Her small head lolled, eyes closing. Rain pelted us as Carter's deputies arrived, securing the suspect in cuffs. I shielded the girl from the worst of the downpour with my body. The world felt distant, muted, a static hum as adrenaline receded. The forest loomed, wind-whipped branches clattering like bones. A deputy took the girl, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. She shivered, glance darting to me, eyes brimming with tears, but a spark of recognition too. I whispered, "You're with the sheriff now. You're safe." She managed a weak nod. Carter led her toward his SUV. I stood for a moment, leaning against the broken beam, the storm thrumming through my bones. The suspect, clad in park volunteer lanyard, was unconscious, likely from blood loss or sheer shock. A deputy kneaded his wrist for a pulse. Carter approached me, voice quiet over the wind. "Good job, Hayes. You saved her." I exhaled, taking in the roaring creek, the pounding rain. What made you think to bring her here?" Carter shook his head. He bought her off the street in Cedar Shade Village, a stray child, hungry and cold. Knew we'd be busy with the storm. He used that abandoned mine as a hideout, his lanyard from that summer camp volunteer. He wanted people to think it was the same guy. But his prints didn't match the volunteers. He'd known how to stay off the grid by living off scraps. Someone taught him. He already tried once last month, killed a boy at Pine Hollow Camp, left him in those red furs. No one noticed. You might be the first to connect the subtlest clues. He paused. He wanted a child hostage. He'd been watching the Volunteer Appreciation Weekend, saw kids leave the creek area to chase salamanders. He picked her up near the picnic area early this morning. My jaw locked. So he's been preparing, living off scraps in the abandoned mine, wearing the lanyard to mislead us. The footprints circling, probably children he lured earlier, killed, and wore their jackets to mask the smell. My voice trembled. He used that sandy pillow to hide the blood. He nodded. His real name's Robert Quinn. Mental patient escaped 2 years ago. Somehow lived off the grid in these woods, fed on hikers. Rarely leaves midden piles of rabbit carcasses for traps. He's been at it for months. We'll need to search the mine tunnels before they collapse. Could be other victims. I swallowed, shivering in the downpour. I'm glad I came back. But next time, I might not be so lucky. My gaze drifted to the narrow tunnel entrance. The wind howled, ominous, as though it had its own will. Carter put a hand on my shoulder. "Let's get you out of this storm." "You did good, Hayes. Let this be the last time a child goes missing here." I exhaled, nodding, the creek's roar pressing in on me. This forest had hidden a man like Quinn for months. I had looked right past the patterns, so sure I knew every inch. The storm bore down, bending the trees, as though the forest itself was cleansing. I followed Carter, stepping over the drenched earth towards safety. But I felt a chill to the bone. The forest might seem at peace now, but it had secrets yet to reveal. That evening, the storm raged in full fury, wind snapping branches, rain hammering the ranger station's roof like hail. I booked time off to decompress, but sleep eluded me. Over dinner in the small kitchenette, Deputy Wu placed a stack of sealed evidence bags on the table. The boots, the jacket, the backpack, and the doll. He looked tired. We scanned Quinn's cabin, but we found other items. Torn pages from children's books, crumpled photographs of kids we can't ID. We suspect there may be more victims. He set a mug of strong coffee in front of me. "Thought you could use this." I wrapped my hands around a mug, letting the heat seep into my palms. The station's walls rattled with each gust. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw the blackened silhouette of Lost Pine Ridge, looming like a raven's wing. My mind replayed the morning's rescue, the child's face burning into my memory. I took a shaky sip. What about the mine? "We're bringing in demolition teams." Wu shook his head. "No can do tonight. The tunnels are unstable, could collapse at any time. Sheriff Carter's ordered a full closure until the engineering team arrives. We've posted warning signs around the perimeter." He paused. Quinn was found semi-conscious in one of the side tunnels. Dr. Voss says he's going to live, but he's in custody. We'll interrogate him tomorrow. He might talk. I nodded. If there are other victims, we need to find them before the tunnels cave. The station's lights flickered. You think Quinn stayed there all these months? He exhaled. It's possible. No one's searched the mine since '63. Old stories of miners wandering off never to be seen again. We assumed it was just local myth. But Quinn, he knew these woods like the back of his hand. Wu's expression hardened. Ranger Hayes, are you? Okay. I know what you saw today. It's not easy to shake. I closed my eyes. I'm fine. La. I was never more afraid of these woods. They had swallowed Quinn, feeding him, allowing him to slaughter. How many others had vanished? I had patrolled this sector for years. Dry summer months, heavy winter snows. I'd walked this ground over and over. But until this morning, I never noticed the scent of old fear, the hush beneath the canopy. Wu nodded, sliding back into his chair. I'll let you get some rest. You did good today. The girl's safe. Read the report. Dr. Voss will have preliminary IDs soon. He left me alone, the coffee steam curling upward. I took a deep breath and drained the cup. I had to see the mine. I grabbed my rain jacket, knowing the rain had eased to a drizzle, and stepped outside. The forest's edges glowed silver under the station's motion lights. I slid down the access road toward the mine entrance, just off the Lost Pine Ridge Road, where flashlights and evidence markers flickered among the trees. As I descended, I noticed fresh stakes of yellow tape, caution, unstable ground. I stepped around them, climbing onto a rock jutting above the muddy slope. The mine entrance gaped open, black and silent. The storm had slowed, but the forest still wept. I shone my flashlight inside. Tunnel walls narrow, beams long decayed, a rickety crossing just inside. I swallowed, pressing forward. My boots crunched on gravel. The air changed, fainter, stale, layered with centuries of damp earth. I ducked under a low oak branch and traced the damp wood frame propping the tunnel. I paused at the spot where Quinn had held the girl. My actions earlier replayed as a slower blur. The flare-green smoke Carter shot, the rise of the child's head. I swallowed hard and moved forward. Chiroptera scuttled overhead, distant drip, drip echoing in the darkness. I tripped on a loose board and dust erupted. A rat squeaked and vanished. I coughed, shining my light ahead. Within 10 paces, I found a small side tunnel branching off. A stench, something rotting, hit me. I blinked, raised the beam, revealing a mound of clothes, small jackets, socks, a torn stuffed rabbit, stained in dark red. My stomach clenched. Beneath them, an arm, half covered in leaves, skeletal. I gasped, retching. My flashlight's beam shook, illuminating a small, long-cracked photograph pinned to the wall. A family portrait. 2 parents smiling at their child, a boy, no more than 8, named Elias Bennett, age 8. The edges were singed, but the faces were clear. My hands trembled. I stepped back. The stench rose stronger, fresh fluid seeping into the soil. I scanned the floor, footprints in the dust, small, near the mound. I followed them back toward the main tunnel. As I turned, my beam caught a smear of red on the wall, handprints small, smeared upward as though little fingers had tried to escape. A low moan drifted from deeper within, a child's voice. Help me. My heart froze. I swallowed, choking. I thought of the rescued girl, safe now, but this boy had been here too. I crept forward, each step slower than the last. The tunnel curved, narrowing. I stepped over broken planks. The moan came again, please. The voice was faint, but unmistakable. I kept going until I reached a collapsed chamber, logs and rocks heaped in a mound, blocking the passage. Through the cracks I saw a pale boot, child-sized, dangling. The sound of rasping breath came from the far side. No, not again. I risked my knee, pressing into the tunnel floor to peer deeper. Among the rubble lay a small body, face turned away. I recognized the boot style. Tiny green-black rubber boots sold at the Sea to Shade general store. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling a sob. He was alive, barely, scooping me into the weak center of vision. A boy, no more than 8, brown hair matted with dirt, eyes wide with fear. He blinked at me, breath hitching. I tried to call out, voice cracking. I'm Ranger Hayes. I'm here to help. The boy's eyes slid shut. The tunnel rumbled, the ground shook. I realized the entire mine was collapsing, dirt and decayed beams giving way under rain-saturated soil. Every instinct screamed to get out. I slid beneath the rubble, reaching into my pack for a first aid kit. My fingers found the bandages. I ripped open the kit and wrapped his arm, bone protruding where mud had washed away flesh. He whimpered, tears mixing with grime. I pressed the last heat pack to his chest. His shuddering breath sounded like wind through hollow reeds. Above, rock fell from the tunnel ceiling, dust exploding. I shouted, "Stay with me." The boy trembled, ears ringing with the collapse. Then a beam snapped overhead, and I ducked, covering his head until the roar subsided. I shook him gently. "I need to get you out. Hold on." I glimpsed the tunnel mouth ahead, just 20 feet away. One more collapse and we'd be buried. I let out a determined breath and hoisted him into my arms. He was impossibly light. Exhaustion edged his small body. Rainwater trickled from both of us, but I didn't care. I stumbled forward, arms straining. Rocks rained behind us as I stumbled into the main shaft. The tunnel mouth was only inches away now. Fresh air glimmered. I ducked beneath a broken beam and fell onto my knees, dragging the boy through the muck. We emerged into twilight, gray light filtering through shattered timbers. I set him on the forest floor and wiped his face. He coughed, tears trickling. I turned, looking back at the mine entrance, a gaping maw of darkness, but now filled with collapsed timbers, earth, and rain-slicked rocks. The forest exhaled. Silence fell. I lifted him to my shoulder. My arms burned as I carried him down the slope toward the sheriff's SUV. Carter, Wu, and 2 deputies raced to meet me. Carter knelt, tearing open a thermal blanket. The boy's eyes fluttered open as heat cradled him. Carter whispered, "You're safe, kid. We've got you." I stepped back, leaning on a tree trunk. Rain pelted us in sheets. My heart raced, mind spiraling. No more children would vanish here. Quinn's network, whoever taught him to wait, to kill, was finished. The mine was sealed, its entrance no longer a promise of secrecy. The forest had given up its children this day. Now it could begin to let them rest. The following morning, the sun struggled through ragged clouds, drenching the forest in cold light. I arrived at the scene where the mine entrance had been. Overnight, deputies and volunteers had hoisted large metal plates to seal the opening, bolted securely, marked with "Danger Unstable." Caution tape fluttered in the crisp air. The collapsed timber and stone strewn about looked nothing like the open maw I'd left. It was as though the forest itself had closed its jaws. Sheriff Carter met me at the gate. He looked weary but relieved. We recovered the boy's ID, Elias Bennett. He was reported missing 2 days ago from Camp Pineglade. His parents didn't know where he was. He tapped the sealed entrance. "Gates up." Engineering teams here by noon to concrete over the cavity. I nodded, stepping closer. The wind sighed through the pines, gentle, like a lullaby. I took a deep breath. Feels wrong, even with this entrance blocked. The forest still holds something, a sadness. He nodded. I know. But those kids, Mallory, Elias, maybe others, they're out now. We'll search for more tunnels, but for now, consider it done. He turned to me. Hayes, you saved 2 kids. Carter's badge isn't enough to say thanks. I forced a tired smile. Just doing my job. He clasped my shoulder. You're one of the best rangers we've got. We need you. His voice softened. Take a break, go home. Cedar Shade's cold this time of year, but at least you won't have to listen to empty tunnels creaking. I looked at the sealed gate, then back at his face. I guess I'll take you up on that. He nodded, and I made my way down the trail. The forest felt oddly calm, bordering on serene. I noticed how bright the ferns seemed after yesterday's rain, emerald and glossy. I recalled how sick with dread I'd been just hours ago, crouching over that collapsed chamber. Now the forest knurled gently. I walked back to my truck, boots sloshing through puddles. Each breath tasted of pine, of new beginnings. At the station, I debriefed Wu and Dr. Voss. The coroner confirmed Mallory's blood on the boots found near marker 27, and Elias's remains, mixed with those from at least 3 other children, dated between 2019 and 2023. Quinn had been more prolific, more methodical than any of us realized. I closed my eyes at the revelation. So many nameless, lost souls, their bones gnarled beneath the forest floor, hidden beneath leaves. Dr. Voss placed a hand on my arm. Thanks to you, though, we'll bring families closure. We've notified the parents. Today's closure is just the start. Future calls will come. I nodded, his words both comforting and haunting. That evening, I sat on the station's porch, bare trees swaying in a soft breeze. The sky, stripped of clouds, revealed 1,000 stars, pinpoints of silver in the dark blanket. I sipped hot cocoa, watching the lights from Cedar Shade Village sparkle like fireflies in the valley below. My thoughts drifted to Mallory and Elias, both now safe, but so many unclaimed souls beneath the forest floor. Quinn's reign of terror was done, sealed behind the rubble. But this canyon had tasted blood, and I wondered if it would ever truly forget. I rose as a lone owl, called from deep in the wood. Against the glittering sky, I felt the weight in my chest, grief interwoven with relief. I inhaled, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. Tomorrow, I'd file my patrol report, request time for counseling. But tonight I'd rest. Cedar Shade's darkness felt somehow softer, more forgiving. The forest's eyes had turned away, at least for now. 2 weeks later, I returned to North Fork Trail for my final inspection before winter closed it. The ground was frosted, needles crisp beneath my boots. Marker 28, a battered post half hidden behind ferns, had been replaced. Fresh, pink gleamed. The graves of lost children, now recovered, will be laid to rest later this month in Cedar Shade's Memorial Grove. Families have been notified. Many had flown in for the service. I carried an empty field notebook to note any changes. The forest here was unusually still. No migrants singing, no rustle of chipmunks. The only sound was my own breath. I paused at marker 27, where I'd first found the jacket scrap. A small memorial now stood, a blue ribbon tied to the post, a printed photograph of Mallory, grinning broadly, arm linked with her father. Beneath the ribbon, someone had placed a cluster of pine cones and a single white wildflower. I felt tears prick my eyes and knelt, touching the ribbon gently. As I rose, I saw footprints in the frost. Adult boots heading downstream, child boots following in tiny arcs, both heading toward marker 28. My heart stuttered. For a moment, I thought someone was lost again. I ducked beneath the ferns and traced the prints. They were from yesterday's freeze, old double set. I followed them to marker 28, where the boots discovered by Quinn still hung, now encased in a glass memorial box beside the new post. A plaque read, "Gone but not forgotten. Sea to Shade's lost children." My pulse slowed. These were the same boots, placed there as a reminder. It was fitting. The tracks led me here, as though guiding me toward remembrance. I exhaled, head low. Just beyond, stands of hemlock and birch glimpsed the shimmering river. I closed my eyes, letting the hush fill me. A sudden rustle sent me twisting toward the creek clearing. A young girl, no more than 6, stood by the water gathering wildflowers. She wore a bright yellow coat, mittens too small, and a wool hat with a pom-pom. My breath caught. I thought of Mallory's coat, yellow too, and felt bile rise again. I approached slowly. The girl turned, and our eyes met. Her face was angelic, soft features, large brown eyes. A ghost of a smile flickered across her lips. "Are you a ranger?" she called shyly. Her voice was light, yet carried an echo, a resonance that tugged at my soul. I knelt in the frost. "Yes, I'm Ranger Hayes." "What's your name?" She tilted her head, eyes glinting. "I'm Emily Jackson. I'm collecting flowers for my friend's grave." She pointed upstream. I swallowed. Emily's name, old classmate from grade school who'd vanished in these woods 20 years ago. No, that Emily had been my sister's friend, lost on Cedar Loop, never found. I thought I recognized the name. "And whose grave are you visiting, Emily?" My voice trembled. She smiled, as though we shared an inside joke. "My friend Mallory. She told me to bring snowdrops. They'll keep her warm." She held up a handful of delicate white flowers, frost glittering on their petals. My throat constricted. The sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the creek. I exhaled, rising slowly. "Mallory, you came to see her." Emily nodded. "She told me she loves daisies, but I thought snowdrops were prettier for the frost." She knelt and placed the flowers at the base of marker 28, next to the boots. I closed my eyes, blinking away tears. "Thank you," I whispered. She faced me, brow furrowed. "You knew Mallory?" she asked. "We were friends." I waved at the memorial. "I'm taking care of this place." She smiled again, that ghost of a smile. Her eyes glittered as though they held starlight. Now she has someone else to care for her. She took a step forward, pointing at my lapel, where my ranger badge glinted. "You're a good ranger." I nodded, biting my lip. "Thank you." She took my hand, that little girl's hand, cold but not frozen. I felt a chill ripple through me. She drew me closer to marker 28. "Will you help me look for the rest of the children?" she asked softly. "They're here. I can't find them." Her voice was laced with sorrow. My grip tightened on her hand. "We will find them. I promise." She let go, gathering more snowdrops. "Help me, Ranger." I watched as she placed the blossoms, then knelt on the forest floor, pressing her palm to the earth. My breath hung thick. "Thank you," she whispered, rising. She turned, raising one hand in a wave. Then she walked away, down the trail toward marker 29, the sun glinting off her yellow coat. I stood, frozen, watching her retreat. I didn't hear her footsteps. I hesitated, eyes narrowing. Something in her gait struck me as odd. She moved in a slow, deliberate rhythm, head tilted to one side, as though she were listening to the forest. I watched until she rounded the bend and vanished. I exhaled, shuddering. My pulse hammered. I took a step forward, recovery in my heart. She was a child seeking peace for her friend. But then the forest hush pressed in. My gaze fell to the snowdrops at marker 28 fresh. Yet I'd picked them at 6 a.m. today. The frost had melted hours ago. How could they be so pristine? A flicker of movement behind me. I spun. No one. Only a rustle of wind through amber leaves. I bent to touch the snowdrops, still cold. I pressed my palm to the hem of Emily's coat left behind in memory, bright yellow, but frost-tinged as though never thawed. I stood, shivering. A laugh soft and distant drifted through the trees, childlike, lilting, echoing. My breath caught. I closed my eyes, replaying Emily's words. Help me find the rest of the children. I swallowed, knotting my stomach. I thought I'd seen my sister's friend, lost 2 decades ago, a victim never recovered. My mind reeled. I took a tentative step toward the underbrush where Emily had disappeared. The forest seemed to exhale a single breath, leaves trembling in response. I exhaled and walked on deeper along Lost Creek Trail. The sun sank lower, turning the mist to smoke. The hush folded around me, pressing in on every side as I headed toward marker 29. I realized then that the forest hadn't finished with me. The hidden children remained, their bones still cradled by rot and leaf. Mallory and Elias were gone, but others waited. I had sealed the mine, but this forest had more passages, more hidden chambers I'd never discovered. The ghost of Emily. No, not Emily Jackson, but every child I failed to find until now, walked beside me, leading me deeper. I raised my flashlight as dusk draped the canopy in violet. The light caught a small yellow silhouette pressed against a tree trunk. Faint, spectral, Emily's coat. I stepped forward, voice trembling. I'm coming, show me the way. A soft giggle was the only answer. The forest exhaled again. I followed, deeper into the pines, toward darkness and memory. It's been 3 months since the mine collapse. The rain has given way to early winter frost. Cedar needles gleam like emeralds in the dawn. I still patrol North Fork Trail, though I'm no longer the same ranger. The forest watches, but now I watch it back, listening for whispers beneath the leaves, for footprints in new fallen snow. I collect snowdrops and daisies each morning, leaving them at the memorial box beside marker 28. Families come sometimes, leaving ribbons, drawings, handwritten notes. We'll never forget, fly free, little ones. Last week, a small group of volunteers and I uncovered a hidden shaft near marker 30, just a shallow lattice of tunnels, long collapsed, beyond what Quinn used. But among the rubble and silt, we found tiny fingerprints carved into stone walls, childish initials, and a drawing of a bear. We also found a small bronze locket engraved EJ. I clutched it, turning it over in my palm. Maybe it belonged to Emily Jackson's sister, lost in these woods before I was born. I replaced the locket at marker 29, tying it to a branch above the inscription, "Forever in Our Hearts." I watched as a single snowdrop fell from my fingers, landing on the locket like a brushstroke of white paint. That night, I dreamed of Emily again, her pale face, dark eyes shining. She stood at marker 28, beckoning me with one finger, then drifted westward, pulling me toward marker 31. I chased her through corridors of birch and alder, but she vanished beyond a ledge where a long-buried creek once flowed, now a frozen rift. I looked down and saw dozens of half-buried bones, small, stiller than stones. I awoke with a start, chest pounding. The station's clock read 3:15 a.m. I lay in the dark, pondering the dream's warning. When the sun rose, I grabbed my flashlight and headed to marker 31, even though the ground still held a thin sheen of ice. The forest was crisp, each step crunching beneath my boots. At marker 31, I knelt, scanning the ground. My breath hung in misty wisps. The air was still. Then I noticed the faint outline of something buried under leaves and snow, a shallow depression, the shape of a small body. I dug away leaves with my hands. Then with a collapsed shovel, I found leaning nearby. My gloved fingers closed around bone. I pulled at the clothing, remnants of a green jacket, shredded from rot. The fabric glistened with frost. I shivered, heart hammering. I followed the depression of the ground farther down a short embankment, halfway to the old water channel. The bones lay scattered, a child's skull, small ribs, long femur, remnants of at least 2 children. I recognized one jacket partially, green-black rubber boots, size 7, likely the boy I'd found last month. The other boot was crimson small, the fabric still clinging to the sole, Mallory's boots. I pressed my palm to my mouth, staggering back. The forest around me held its breath. Tears burned my eyes, freezing on my cheeks. Then I noticed them, tiny handprints, carved into the bark of a young birch nearby, the same handprints Quinn had left in the mine. But these were faint, 2 sets, one child's, one adult's, as though the child had reached up to be guided. Underneath, carved with a small, jagged rock, were 3 names: Elias, Mallory, Jensen. I traced the letters with my gloved fingertip. Jensen, Mallory's last name, combined with the other 2 boys and a girl. My breath hissed. I pressed the bones back into the ground gently, covering them with leaves and snow. My hands shook so violently I could barely bury them. The birch handprints glinted in the sunlight, water trickling down the carved lines as the frost melted. I exhaled, raising my face to the sky. The forest canopy parted, revealing pale morning sun. A chill breeze drifted through, lifting my hair. I closed my eyes. A soft voice drifted on the wind, familiar and distant. "Thank you, Ranger. We are home." I opened my eyes, and where the birch had been, there were only fallen leaves drifting in circles around the base. The names and handprints had vanished, as though they never existed. Silence settled once again over North Fork Trail. I rose, pocketing my flashlight. I would fill out the report, notify the coroner, and families would finally have closure. But something told me I would be returning to these woods for years to come, planting snowdrops, gathering daisies, watching for those faint tracks in the snow. Because the forest remembers every soul who's walked its paths, every child's laughter turned to silence. It waits until you dare to forget, then reminds you. As dawn's first rays warmed the ridge, I headed back to the station, leaving the buried bones at peace. The hush of the forest felt lighter, as though a breath had passed through it. I glanced back once, but the leaf-littered ground looked ordinary, no hint of where the children had rested all these years. I took a steadying breath. The scars this forest bore would remain, but so would its beauty. Golden sun through bare branches, the patter of melting snow, and the promise that even the lost can find their way home. I squared my shoulders and stepped onto the trail, ready for whatever the forest would show me next.